So with the next, thank you. The next meeting was the appointment of Arapita.
Right.
Yeah, because Arapita's a new
Did you have
yes, so I think I'm over for that. Yeah.
we have the item 9.1 appointment of new representative with Arawa Lakes Trust and the Rotorua Arawa Lakes Strategy Group. The Arawa unfortunately can't be here. I think is there anybody that doesn't know Arawa? Well, if you don't, you'll get to know them. And he'll get to know you. Okay. I asked for a mover. Kevin. Seconded the worship the mayor. Any discussion, comments before we move for sanction? All those in favour of the motion that Arapita Tahana be accepted as a new member of the Rotorua Lake Strategy Group. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried unanimously.
Point of clarification too. We usually have MFA.
Yes, we've got Lorena. She's on the screen at the Zoom, but she hasn't put up her
Ora.
camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, coming on the 9th. We're up to the public forum now.
Oh, public forum. We're in your hands, John.
You're welcome to go and have a seat.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Thanks. Maybe for the offer of being able to get to the meeting this morning. Greatly appreciated. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the chair of the Wastewater Quality Society. And I mean, obviously over a long period of time, we've had a very strong interest in the quality of the lakes and all that goes on around the lakes. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to provide some feedback from our last annual general meeting which we held in early March. And the reason why it's important to this particular committee is that it relates obviously directly to this committee, and that we wanted to put forward two resolutions to the committee, two recommendations. And we have provided a paper which I believe has been circulated, so you have the opportunity to look at that specifically. But I thought what I would do this morning is, rather than go through the paper, you can read that for yourselves, obviously, but just emphasise some of the key points that are relevant to those two recommendations. The first recommendation relates to the terms of reference of the Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group. And the resolution sort of arose because there's a feeling, I think, that the group needs to sort of expand its horizons a little bit beyond perhaps what its original terms of reference were. And that's largely in reflection to obviously a large number of changes that have occurred since the group was initially established. And of course, some of the key changes that have occurred relate to things such as the development of the Three Waters legislation and the impact that that's going to have both on terms of water use for potable supply, but also the input of potential stormwater and sewerage over the long term. Another important change, of course, is the implementation of Te Mana OTY and the implications that will have in terms of the long-term management of the lakes and the lands around the lakes. And the third big change, of course, that's occurring is the redevelopment of the land and water plan in the context of the National Policy Statement on Fresh Water, and all that needs to be considered as part of that. But I think there's also another thing to take into account, and that is that the Wastewater Quality Society has a very broad overview of what it takes to actually manage the lakes. And interestingly, last night we had an excellent presentation at our committee meeting by Professor David Hamilton. And of course, you know, David's been lobbying for catchment management over a long period of time. And in his presentation, he certainly emphasised how critical it is that catchment management as an integrated part of all lake restoration and lake protection activities. Effectively, what happens in the lake starts way up in the top part of the catchment. And I guess the lake's water quality is in a position where it takes a fully integrated ecological system view. So it doesn't look at any one specific component that various agencies might have a focus and attention on. It looks at the whole ecological and balanced systems. And as a consequence of that, I think that there is a role, or potentially a role, for more involvement by organisations such as the Lake Water Quality Society and organisations such as this committee. And we would just ask that the committee consider that recommendation in light of those aspects. The second recommendation related to the need for a technical and scientific review to be undertaken on the whole of the Te Arawa Lakes program. And this review is not so much a detailed review as what is currently proposed for Lake Rotorua. Every 5 years, we undergo an intense scientific review for Lake Rotorua, in particular as it relates to the implementation of PC10. But this review is more about asking the question, are we doing enough? And if not, what else can be done which will meet community needs? And so it's really about asking the question. It's not sort of saying, well, we're doing enough, let's wait and see whether that gives the results that we hope that it will have over time. It's really about coming back and seeing, in light of what we now know, beyond Lake Rotorua, obviously, because we want to consider all lakes, is there scope to actually undertake a technical and scientific review? Because as we look at certainly the last few months in terms of the lakes, we've had increased incidence of algal blooms, particularly in Lake Rotorua, but also in Rotorua, and that's influenced the recreational lake use of the lake over the peak summer period. We've seen that the TLIs, the trophic level index, have been a little bit stubborn. They've sort of tracked down, but they haven't continued to track down over time. And yes, we can sit there and say, okay, they might slowly come down over a lot more time if we leave it. But perhaps we need to be asking the question, are there other things going on in the catchments, in the lakes, which are influencing that stubborn reduction in TLIs? And then, of course, we've got a whole lot of other changes on the horizon, such as climate change, ongoing urban development, changes in land use, all potentially impacting in terms of what the future predicament of the lakes will be over time. And so it's in that context that we think that it's worthwhile considering to undertake a more comprehensive scientific technical review to try and answer that question. Are we doing enough? And what else do we really need to know to protect all the lakes within the Rotorua catchment? So that's pretty much the nutshell. I think that's summarised in our paper. So if there's any questions or clarification, I'm more than happy to take that with your permission.
Right. Thank you, John. So open for discussion.
Yeah, just thank you, John. And this arose at your AGM, Lakes Water Quality Society AGM, where you had researcher from Waikato University very involved in the lakes. Is there any particular concern, or do you feel that you want to be part of the program strategy group reporting at these meetings?
Well, I think there's the main question for me, for the committee for Lakes Water Quality is the broader ecological system being taken into account? And I think that because of the nature of the Lakes Water Quality Society, because we're multi-partisan, we don't have any large fixed agenda apart from speaking on behalf of the lakes, making sure that they continue to be restored. We sort of think that we can keep an oversight of all the issues that need to be considered in terms of driving the lake restoration program forward over the long term. We don't have a secondary agenda so much. It's all about the lakes. And I think the other key point is, of course, is that we want to make sure that whatever happens in the lakes, it's based on good quality science. It's the most efficient, practical, economic solution that meets the needs of the community. And our society represents the whole community.
And if I could, supplementary to that, I certainly support the recommendations that you bring today, but I don't know that we're resolving today. We've got other recommendations that we're looking at the whole program of the Rotorua Te Arawa Lakes program. Is there a view, does the society have a view about the role of Te Arawa Lakes Trust in terms of being a lead oversight as well of the program?
Well, obviously, Te Arawa Lakes Trust have a critical role across, the management strategy. They're the lake bed owners, so we recognise that and value that contribution. I mean, obviously, from a society's point of view, we want to work closer with the Te Arawa Lakes Trust. But I think that the overarching thing is, from our society's perspective, is that there's a whole raft of other catchment-related issues which need to be brought to bear, which the society can represent perhaps a little bit more broadly than what the trust currently does.
Just as I spoke in the works, John, would you like to work closely with the Te Arawa Lakes Trust, the people actually doing the work, like were they putting the mats on the floor of the thing, and just be part of that and give your views rather than mentioning what you want after it's done?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we view the weed control in the lakes as an absolutely critical issue. And I mean, the Lakes Water Quality has lobbied hard and fast over the last almost 10 years for the wide use of endosol as part of the lake weed strategy. And that needs to be sort of seen as complementing the work that Te Arawa Lakes Trust has done with the installation of the weed control nets.
I say that because I think they'll welcome your participation or just being with them and so on. I think they're doing some good work, but it'd be good to have other people there as well. With some thoughts.
Perhaps
Yes.
one further question, John, your request for a technical and scientific review, that can get carried into something else we're looking at. That immediately raises funding implications for that. Do you see that as being shared between Regional Council and Rotorua Lakes Council? The Trust hasn't got much poo here for that.
Well, if the Regional Council and the District Council think that it's got a lot of value, then we would certainly encourage them to contribute financially. I mean, there may be other sources of funding that could be tapped into as well, and we would support those sorts of applications. I mean, obviously, the science community are important.
Yeah, all things for us to consider. Thank you.
Okay. Kevin, Taru, and then Rangi in that order. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, John, for the report. Just in terms of your partnership of the strategy group, and that was formed under legislation back in 2004, and the legislation is very clear in terms of the three stalls, the partners for the strategy group. So I'm not sure whether you're asking for a law change for the Lakes Water Quality Society to be a voting part or not, but that would be a law change to do that. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to put this report to the table and received by this group today, and we'll take the two recommendations under advisement for staff to come back on at a later date. So I'm happy to move that this report be received, and we will vote. We'll
So you move?
Just clarification on your
report be
move.
received.
That's under a recommendation that we're facing later, and it should be this committee that makes that recommendation.
We're just receiving this report from the public forum, that's all.
Taru?
Tēnā koe, tātou ian kia koe me koutou hoki, me te nei, me ngā me mo te hapu. Thanks, John. Look, just on the action point to a technical and scientific review, just picking up on what Sir Toby said around Te Arawa Lakes Trust. One would expect that Te Arawa Lakes Trust will be intimately involved in that from a Tauranga Māori point of view, from a tuapapa framework that they've got developed and filtering through that as well. So the two need to be sort of side by side together. I'm assuming that in this review, that's what you're implying as well.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Well, as I say, we recognise Carol Lakes Trust as a fundamental partner in the management of the lakes long-term and both components that you allude to.
Yeah.
Critical part.
So what I'm emphasising, what Toby said really is around Arawa Lakes Trust are an integral part and a serious partner in that particular aspect, amongst other things.
And just to build on that, from Arawa Lakes Trust, we'd be happy to meet with, got our chief executive away coming soon, but we've got officers here just love to have a chat, work on the same page.
We do meet regularly with the trust, and last year we were planning to have our joint symposia, and I think that had a education program with the schools, and we were trying to sort of mesh all that together. Unfortunately, COVID got on the road and scuttled all our plans in the very end. So unfortunately, that didn't happen. So we have a pretty close working relationship with the trust, and of course we have King Kennedy on our committee, and we now have another representative from Lake Rotorua representing the Iwi and
Any further discussion before we close? Well,
Councillor Winters has made a move, so we can see the
right. Councillor Winters has moved that we receive the report. Do we have a seconder, please?
Yep.
Jeff? All those in favour of the motion being fully received by council, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Well done, John. Thank you.
Two changes to the business, declarations of interest.
I assume, I take for granted there's no new item to be added to the agenda?
No, sir.
No, nothing. Thank you. Order of business.
No changes requested.
No changes, thank you. Declaration, we just take that for granted, don't we? Declaration of interest. Unless someone wants to sign a special paper. Yeah, and I think we've dealt with the public. We welcome them, although they're not here, and that's very good. No, I mean, we've made provisions so that they can participate through those screens up there. Minutes to be confirmed. Would someone like to move that the minutes be confirmed?
Mr. Chairman.
Being moved by Councillor Winters, and a seconder, your worship, the mayor. And I take it there's no discussion?
Oh, just one thing on page 14, Mr. Chairman, we've asked for a follow-up by RLC on the sustainable forest alternative for the future hui. So I thought it would have been this one, but never mind. That's still being action. Thank you. Just on what the proposal is.
Okay. Any further discussion or questions on what Councillor Winters has just presented? Yes, Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the sustainable forest approach that we're in reference group is mentioned in the RLC report provided by Stavros. And we can speak to it briefly at that point.
Okay.
Helen is part of that group as representative of Bay of Plenty Regional Council. But Stavros is here if there are any direct questions about the progress of the sustainable forest approach.
You'll come up at that point.
Yeah. So
Right,
now
thank you.
Arawa Lakes Trust report from Nikki.
Right, you're in your hands, Nikki. If you-
Morning, Matt. Hey everybody, nice to see you all, Tina. So I guess I'll just take, there are a couple of things that I want to highlight in my report this morning, but otherwise I'll just take it as read, and if anybody's got any questions, feel free to put them to me. I guess I just wanted to acknowledge, following on from John's presentation this morning, just to acknowledge Dennis's appointment as the Lakes Chair for the Science and Research Program for our lakes, and we just really welcome his appointment and acknowledge the MOU that the Regional Council and Waikato University had to provide, I guess, that leadership in the science space moving forward. We've met with Dennis, met with our board and our committee, and we've met with staff just to highlight the areas that Tattle would like to be engaged in the research program moving forward, and just building on some of the work that we've already done. I just want to acknowledge Dennis's significant experience in freshwater and climate change, and brings international experience. So just want to acknowledge that this morning. The second thing, I guess, just to acknowledge, and I will be giving a presentation later on the RM reform and the Three Waters reform and the potential impact of that on our settlement, and just really raising the issue with you, you to note our current position on this, and until we have further conversations with ministers and officials about this, we can bring it back. But I will be giving a short presentation later on. And just I wanted to let you all know that our funding from MFE was finally signed off last week. We had 761,000 allocated over the next 3 years from the Te Mana Uti Wai Fund to progress the Tarawera Critical Impact Project. And Alva will come to the next meeting and we'll be able to describe to you how we're implementing that. Our deed was only signed last week, so we have been waiting since October last year for that to land. So we apologise for the delay, but until money is in hand, it's very difficult to move forward. So we just look forward to starting that project. We had initially put the 1st of April, but that's been and gone. So it looks like it'll be the new business year. And any other questions I'm happy to take from the floor.
Just on page 25, Mr. Chairman, can this group, on behalf of you, sir, send a letter to Linmore Primary School because they've won a national award for their catfish program and the pest control work they're doing on Rikoia Island and around the Rohi. So can we send a letter to them congratulating those kids? That's marvellous work. They've been going at it a few years now, and now they've won a national award. So I think recognition from this strategy group would be awesome.
Yes, absolutely. Moved by Winters that we sent a letter to the school, seconded by, thank you, Paul, by her worship the mayor.
Can I add to that, Kevin? They love certificates, don't they?
Well,
so
it's
each
in
of
your
those
court.
children, if they got a little certificate.
It's in your court, Steve. You from the mayor or something like that. I don't know.
Oh, we thank them, but it's from this committee.
Yeah,
we give a
we can.
certificate.
How we can design up a certificate of appreciation or something.
So the school shall be duly acknowledged in due course. Okay, thank you. Kev? Next item.
Right, so
Oh, sorry, I had a question of Nikki about the Ruku Wai. Are we seeing any impact?
Good question. We've just had our team go out and do some monitoring recently. So we are trialling 3 different weeds of the Uwhi mats on the lake bed. So there are 3 sites, Rotorua, Tarawera and Rotorua, where the Uwhi are. At one of those locations, one of the weeds isn't working so well. So we're actually in the process of removing that mat. But the other 2 weeds are working really well. When we started to remove the mat that had started to break down, it actually had done its job of suppressing the weeds. When the team removed it, it was just a sandy bottom. So now we're just thinking about how do we recruit native species into that lake community. So we're just turning our mind to the next step in the process. And then in Rotorua, I don't want to say too much, but we also put toe coda in where the Uwhi mats, the Uwhi are, and we've noticed a definite increase in recruitment of coda where there is an absence of lake weeds. So one of our team, Corey O'Neill, he is a honatiaki for his hapu and is responsible for the maintenance and management of their coda. And he's noticing the distinct difference in their ability to harvest coda off the toe as a result of having the leaky down. So they've really, it's only been since October we've been in the lake. We've also been approached by iwi in other parts of the country to develop the maps further and to deliver them so they can use them as well. So it is significant. And we've just been in the New York Times in terms of identifying an innovation around recording.
Yes.
Just at the opening of our beautiful sculptures by Lionel Grant down at the lakefront last week, there was question about could we have one of those sort of ecological active science learning at a space for the kids to learn at Rotorua Primary, to see if Coda could possibly migrate and multiply there. They use the lakefront as an active classroom, and it would be a fantastic learning for the children to see, does it work, doesn't it? Yeah.
We've got a school in Popo who have just developed, woven their own 1 metre by 1 metre maps. So they've people are picking up.
So Rotorua Primary, I'm sure Frank Clutter would love to get involved.
We have our science fair in June, so we could invite some of the schools to look at it.
Anything else, Nick?
Is there any questions? I think I've done.
Yes, Dave.
So Toby, science fair, can you tell us more?
So this has come out of the work we have been doing in the catfish space around education. So Mariana and William have largely developed the idea of engaging our schools in a science fair. So it's from the 30th of June to the 2nd of July this year. We've got 45 schools registered. We've got 70 spaces. There are 3 core categories: sustainable innovation options. So that's largely around waste and climate change. Lake water quality, biosecurity and biodiversity. So those are our, and we're having that at motion. We've got a number of sponsors for the science fair, and each of the evenings we've invited guest speakers to talk about the existing science and research.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, seeing there are further, thank you. Thank you for the report. Very good. Look forward to a good feed of Coda.
Yeah.
Could we have a mover, please? Move. And worship mayor, former mayor, and current mayor. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carry. Right, next item on the agenda.
Violet update from Lavina, who's on Zoom.
Lavina.
Morena,
Oh.
tēnā koutou.
Morena.
Morena. We haven't got a full update for you this time round, which I apologise for. So for the next round, we'll look to probably involve some of the updates from the broader reform work that's underway around resource management, climate, and also biodiversity. But what I wanted to share with you is just to give you a brief update in terms of where we've got to with funding, and then I'll touch on just where we've got to in terms of the ongoing conversations we've been having with Rotorua Lakes and Bay of Plenty Regional Council officials with regards to the decision that was made back in or conveyed back in December to yourselves, the decision from the Minister. So with the Jobs for Nature funding, with the Te Mana o Te Wai programme that allocated 30 million, that fund is almost fully allocated. We have assessed about 32 proposals. We're just working on the last number of proposals, and good to see, Nikki, that we've got that other proposal underway for yourselves. Bit slow getting off the mark, but good to see that we've got that underway. In conjunction with that, we're also working through what we call the Essential Freshwater Fund. There was 175 million that was targeted towards building capability and capacity to help implement the essential freshwater reforms. A component of that is focused in supporting building capability to support the system, to support the freshwater farm plan delivery, particularly with needing a workforce that can do certification and auditing of farm plans coming out of those regulations. A key component also is targeted as supporting tangata whenua, and also in terms of catchment communities. So there's quite a bit of work underway at the moment where we're taking a region by regional approach, working with regional councils, but also with iwi technicians in terms of how we can support on the ground action to build awareness around how communities can participate in the implementation of the reforms. Of the 175, we've probably got, there's about 65 million that's left, that's specifically targeted towards catchment communities and or immobilising catchment communities, and also to support tangata whenua on the ground. The other component I wanted to just give some feedback. So we've had ongoing conversations, as I mentioned, with officials in terms of the decision around the rescinding of the Freshwater Improvement Fund for Lake Tarawera. We have, following on from those meetings, we have gone back to the Minister and conveyed that there is a likelihood that we will come back to him to seek a decision to reverse the Lake Tarawera freshwater improvement funding that was rescinded. He's indicated he's comfortable with that happening, but does want to have assurances around satisfactory governance oversight being put in place alongside a detailed work plan and a signed deed. We also tested with him whether, the need for East Rotorua, knowing that there was this ongoing issue around funding. He has indicated that that Jobs for Nature funding is not available to support in that area, and there is no further new monies available for the East Rotorua scheme. And that the conversations to resolve that would have to sit amongst the yourselves as representatives on the Rotorua Te Arawa strategy group. Yeah, so that's, I thought that was important to have something to bring to the table to inform the conversations about that particular topic that we have today.
Thank you, Gloria. Any comments, discussions, questions?
Just a question, Lorena. If I may, in your report, you talk about the resolution that we made here on the 22nd of October, that you hadn't received any update from RLC, but in your verbal report, you've said you've been in touch with officials. Just which officials have you worked with to give you the assurance to put through to the Minister that the oversight of Tarawera, and especially the cultural impact assessment, has been ongoing? Could you just clarify that for me?
Sure. So if I just take it back a step, this is in terms of the Lake Tarawera funding deed that we're making discussions about. Right. So initially, the deed was approved in 2017, and we'd been communicating with Rotorua Lakes right through. I think we had the last time we received an updated work program was in February 2021. We engaged with Stavros, and I think, Helen, you may have been at that meeting on the 12th of May to have a conversation, not just about Lake Tarawera, but that was when we were responding to the funding for Lake Rotoehu and Lake Rotoiti. At that conversation, we had also signalled in terms of Lake Tarawera that there was a risk that the funding for Lake Tarawera might be rescinded given the delays to get a deed in place over that period of time. we had provided a briefing through to the minister that went through on the 30th of June. And then I think subsequent, it might have been around the 7th of July, 8th of July, that we received further information from Stavros and his team that would help us to inform the minister about particular questions he had raised in response to that briefing. I must add too that at the time of meeting on the 12th of May, that's when we received the follow-up work program, which is, I believe, a copy that you've got within your pack. We had concerns even with that work program at that time because there were a number of items within there that were past. I mean, this was in May 2021, and a number of the work program items that had been presented in that deed were making references to activities that should have already have occurred, and so there was still quite a bit of work to do. We decided that at that time, given the briefing was sitting with the minister, to hold off engaging on the Lake Tarawera deed, because we needed to hear from the minister in terms of what his recommendations or preferred recommendations to take it forward would be, given the delay to date.
Yes, just I want to make it very clear through to the minister that there's 3 parties involved, and we work with Te Arawa Lakes Trust, who have helped us with the cultural impact assessment. So it seems a bit of a two-way street. I think it's going to be, we'll probably resolve at a later part of the meeting today that we will seek a meeting with the minister, the 3 parties, so that it's clearly understood that we work collaboratively about the importance of our lakes.
That would be, I mean, that would be good. What we were considering at the time is that the deed was submitted by Rotorua Lakes District Council. So we made the assumption that that conversation, the transparency of what was happening with that deed, was being shared across the 3 parties, and we were working with the applicant who had made that conversation, you know, put that through it. So we had assumed, given that we were dealing with the applicant, as what we do normally with Freshwater Improvement Fund, that those conversations would have been held amongst Rotorua Lakes District Council and the other partners.
Absolutely. And we'll clarify that with the minister at a later meeting.
Yes.
So Chair Toby, Marina, can we just confirm that relative to the minister's interim decision, that would imply that the deed to date has not been signed?
Yes, that's correct. We still haven't signed the deed at this point. We do have an updated deed that we were wanting to just work with Rotorua Lakes, but we would still need to go back to the minister initially and seek his approval to rescind his original decision.
So supplementary, Toby, following on from Mayor Chadwick's comment about working with Te Arawa in the cultural impact assessment, my understanding was that the Freshwater Improvement Fund deeds allocated in 17, the expectation was that the deed would be signed within 6 months of the decision and that the work program would be completed within a 5-year time frame. Is there anything in regards to the cultural impact assessment that would have precluded the deed being signed within that first 6 months or 12 months?
The cultural impact assessment was one aspect of consideration. The other component, what had happened was that we were asked to fund that component as part of the updated deed, but understood that that had already occurred. So the cultural assessment would have been accepted. It wouldn't have been an issue in terms of signing the deed. It would have been the detail of what we actually were looking to fund into the next 2 years that was what we were wanting to get clarification on or seek clarification on.
Thank you.
So Lorena, is the ministry seeking clarification to give certainty after this meeting today? We understood the 22nd was the date that you needed to be notified by.
Yes, so we have been part of meeting with officials, and I understand that there have been some conversations that have occurred that will inform a direction going forward, and we are looking to provide an update to the Minister.
Thank you. And Lorena, could you just confirm, who do you have those discussions with? Is it with all three parties? That's just our concern, that we work collaboratively at this decision-making table. So with whom have you had those discussions?
We've had, in terms of the deed, the officials we've been working with in the last month is officials from Bay of Plenty Regional Council. We've had conversations with Rotorua Lakes Council, and that's based on being invited to those conversations. And I understand Te Arawa Lakes have also met with our senior leaders on this issue as well.
That's right. That's how we want to work going forward, that it's a three-legged stool and we all work collaboratively, and this is the decision-making table.
We can, working forward, we can change the way that we report to do it at this forum. If that's what this forum is looking for, we can do that.
Yes, Councillor Leader.
Thank you, Toby. I think, Mayor Chadwick, it's important that we understand the role of this group in terms of governance vis-a-vis the operational issues. And from listening to the discussion, I'm not privy to it, but I would imagine that a lot of Lorena's interactions take place at the operational level between the three entities. Whether or not they're all joined up, I think is a question we need to ask. And subsequent sign off in terms of final recommendations and resolutions, yes, you're right, they sit at this table. But I don't think that we should get involved in those operational things that MFE on a day-to-day basis want to have a discussion with the tripartite arrangement.
No, that's right.
Well, with that, Doug, I guess everyone is happy with the presentation given by Lorena. We are much clearer than we were yesterday. I assume we are.
Have a mover for Lorena's verbal presentation and the letter from MFE, which is included in the agenda.
Okay. All right, could we have a mover to that Lorena's report be received by this? Dave?
Mr. Chairman, is Lorena staying online to hear the discussion through the latter half of the?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you. Good.
And so you're seconding?
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
could I also, just for the record, express my opinion that the work done by Te Arawa Lakes Trust to ensure mana whenua support through the CIA has been invaluable on the Tarawera sewage scheme project. I think it's important.
Thank you, David. That's being acknowledged, and not right. So what do we do from here?
This is the latest council report.
Lorena.
So Lorena's going to stay online, and I heard a report has been received and seconded. Has it? Yes, so we're on to the Rotorua Lakes Council report.
Right. Who's going to present the Rotorua Lakes Council report? Well, Lorena, if you want to ask any questions while we're conducting business here, please ask.
Thank you.
Chair. Just through the chair, could I signal here, this is where we had a meeting
Yes.
to look at how we are going to work together. Could we note the recommendations? I want to move 1 to 7, but signal now, taking note of what Stavros will present, that I want to speak to 3 and 7. And I have this here to hand out. And public
Do you want us to
excluded.
move,
And public excluded.
do you want to move that now before we discuss it?
Sorry, can I just clarify this report is in public at the moment?
Yes.
So do you want
No,
to move?
it's the later recommendations.
Oh, there
I'm
we go.
signalling now.
Right, signal, right, thank you.
This-
So, it won't be put to a vote, I think until it's finished.
No.
Well, who's taking us through the next one? Oh, audio Stavros, thank you.
Excuse me, sorry, can we just clarify the way forward? This report that was circulated, the addendum under separate cover, that is in public. That has been circulated in public,
That's what I'm speaking to.
so that your submission will be in public then after Stavros, okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is the update from Rotorua Lakes Council on the various programs of work that is focused at the moment by the Rotorua Lakes Council. I think I've got another report later on with regards to East Prosperity. It's a separate report. This is an update on various schemes.
Okay,
I won't go through on them, in extensive detail. I take it, take the report series through it, but basically outlines, where our extensive very productive activities are at this point in time. The exploitation is progressing. Now we've got, a significant number of pre-treatment systems have been installed into the exploitation community of out of the 450 to be installed. The EU is the liaison group continues to work in terms of its mandated function under the resource consent for that scheme. The Rotorua Wastewater treatment plan, both detailed design and bridging consents are in place at the moment, and we are expecting a formal proposal for the comprehensive upgrade of the treatment plant to be received over the next few weeks. They intend of preparing of present to our council around June to enter into a contract to commence the upgrade of the treatment plant. In conjunction with our treatment plant upgrades, it is the ongoing work that's taking place with the sustainable forest approach. As you know, we do have a bridging consent for 5 years at this point in time, and that relates to the point of discharge. The current treatment plant discharges into an area of the forest that's about 400 hectares. The intention is to reduce that by 90%. And the reason for that is that upgraded treatment plant will be treating wastewater to a level where nutrient targets and pathogen targets are achieved at the plant, and therefore will not rely heavily on the land to do the mining for that expectation. We are working through the Tuarega reference group and the landowners, the CNI, and the various who presented under that umbrella to identify the most appropriate site for sustainable forest approach. And we are at this stage, we have identified 5 sites, and each one of these is undergoing a multi-criteria analysis to evaluate whether which is the best site to be a candidate for that eventual discharge over the next few years. We expect that to take place in conjunction with the upgrade of the treatment plant, which might take 3 to 4 years to be completed. And of course, our bridging consent allows 5 years to continue to operate as we are at the moment. The Tarawera Sewage scheme, where we are at the moment, the proposal is as advised earlier, the Rotorua Lakes Council's long-term plan in last year made some sort of decisions that were advised to the ministry as Loretta said in July. But the scheme has been adopted and will be progressed through its long-term plan funding system. The first year, 21-22, we are undertaking a detailed design investigation for each individual property of the 446 properties in Tarawera. That work is now complete, and I expect the contracted offer to be arriving with us this week in order to make a report to and recommendation to our council in 26th of May with regards to engaging the contract for the construction of the Arawa regulation scheme during the years 22-23 and 22-24. Loretta is right too. Following the various discussions we had recently with the strategy group, the program steering group, and the new closely environment, we have received, subsequent to the minister's letter of the 23rd of March, in early April 2022, a letter from MFP advising us a new template for the work plan for Tarawera. And of course, that template will be submitted subject to decisions we will make today. The Rotorua scheme, as you are fully aware, that's the application to the minister to provide some additional funding to complete Rotorua regulation, which is a targeted late, has not been successful. However, Rotorua Lakes Council has earmarked, a $2 million from its water reform program, and because we are progressing Rotorua, we are now constructing the main trunk to be finished under the CFP funding program by June this year. So if eventually additional funding is found to complete the regulation of Rotorua, the main trunk and the connection to the Rotorua scheme will already be in place. The resource consent for this Rotorua allows and provides for that connection to Rotorua. The key criteria will be the funding for that kind of scheme. The urban comprehensive stormwater resource consent obviously is significant because in conjunction with our housing objectives and the intention to identify and develop district plan rules and enable the building of about 10,000 new houses for the district as required over the next few years. The management of stormwater is a significant component, both in terms of quantity and quality. We are working both with the Health and Regional Council, regulatory offices, and also from our colleagues into the operational side to make sure that stormwater management is a combined and integrated approach, because we both own components of the system and we both own components of the responsibility to make sure we have the appropriate capacity for the volume of stormwater, especially under the climate change, and also with regard to expectations for the fresh water standards that are about to come in the near future. The rest of the stuff, relates to activities, which are encompassing the plan change 10 and the MOU with regards to transfer of nutrients as greenfield development takes place. The nutrients from those areas need to be given some credit to the treatment plan for the future adherence to the treatment plant's contribution to sustainable nutrient discharges to Lake Rotorua. I will leave it at that, but I'm more than happy to respond to any questions you may have with regards to any of these items. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Any questions, comments? Yes, Doug.
Toby, a question of clarification. Stavros, did you say that the assessment work in terms of connections to Lake Tarawera has yet to be completed, or it is completed?
Not actually. What can I take a step back? That each individual property needs to be visited and detailed design done for each individual property. The work has now been completed.
Now completed.
Completed. We have about 420 consents, permits for people to enter their property and locate where the ground the pumps will go and the connection to the main tanks. The contractors, the designers have prepared a full scheme design, and this week would give us their contractual offer to execute that work. Obviously, anticipated will be a little bit of a discussion with that offer to make sure we get most effective value for money. And pending our satisfaction to the contractual offer, the intention is for us to propose to our council on the 26th of May, scheduled for the background to the scheme, to give them assurance that the contracted offer is acceptable by officers, and also to update our refunding capital plan, for which we've been working with the Arawa community over the last few months, as directed by our council, to make sure that the repayment options for the net cost of the scheme is more flexible and viable for some of the community members. So 26th of May is our cut-off date, really, where our council will receive an update from the discussions we may have today, 2, a contractual offer, and 3, a capital repayment funding plan by the ratepayers up there in order to commence construction work in the 22-23
So supplementary to Toby, subject to the decisions yet to be made, if the minister's indicative decision to withdraw funding from Lake Tarawera goes ahead, essentially all this planning, consultation with the community is a, and we'll have to start again in terms of getting community buy-in.
Chair Leader, that will be a subject matter for my council, or Rotorua council, to consider all the facts behind it. My job is to present to my council the activities that have been undertaken under instruction from the LTP decisions they have made this year, to proceed to detailed design, to proceed to review of the capital funding process, and subject to discussion, use the strategy group have here the minister's decisions. Obviously, my council will consider its option for it.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Toby. So Chair Leader's question, I think, is important for the ears of Ministry for the Environment here today. So Rotorua Lakes Council approved 2.5 million in funding for the detailed design and appointed a project manager. And as Stavros has explained, that work is well perceived and is virtually complete. Now that funding was approved at a time when the 6.5 million funding subsidy was not under threat of being taken away. And so Rotorua Lakes Council proceeded in good faith to progress this scheme at pace. And I have every confidence that that has been well managed to date. We've engaged well with the community out there, and they've been part of the funding solutions, decisions, and debates as well. And so I think, I just for the record, I would like to say Rotorua Lakes Council has proceeded in good faith, and the project thus far has been well managed.
Thank you, Councillor David.
So
Chairman
could I seek an explanation, on the basis that the $2.5 million, which is now being sunk, was RLC appropriation from where we got it from. And that's not part of the Freshwater Improvement Fund, as Lorena has said. The decision to allocate $750,000 as part of your regional royalty contribution to a scheme like that, is that part of the 2.5, or is that to be on top of that?
I think we're getting into funding and really matters here. I would say very in simple words. The gross cost estimate for Tarawera is about, as we calculated back in 2018, is $22.5 million. Now, that estimate is being validated at the moment through detailed design and contractual. The funding contributions to that $22.5 million is assumed to come from $6.5 million from the freshwater funds from the Ministry of the Environment, $750,000 by the council's articulation office, which is individual property, and $750,000 the regional council. Now, the project is got a project cost structure, and that is the design, consultation, work, officers, times, and so on, is going ahead for project structure. Once those funding contributions have been deducted from a gross cost, there'll be a net cost, and that net cost will be divided between 560 properties to be paid, in fact, So the question I suppose you're asking, Chair Leader, is that if this project was abandoned today, I'm not saying will, let's say theoretically it was abandoned, the costs incurred today for cultural impact assessments, concept designs, detailed designs, and so on, would that be aborted? And that's a decision my council will have to make.
So I was just trying to clarify, now I think I've got it, that the contribution from the regional council and from Rotorua Lakes is round figures $1.5 million. Question I'm asking is the 2.5 that you've already sunk into the pre-consultation, is that part of the 1.5 or is it not? In other words, has it been amortized in terms of your business as usual? I don't know the answer to it, but makes a difference in terms of where the costs sit for the community at large, given the scheme goes ahead.
It's a cost assigned to the gross cost of the project. The subsidy will be removed to create a net cost to be payable by the community.
Everyone happy?
I see Jeff's looking a bit confused.
No, if I may, through the chair, I think Stavros has made it quite clear that the way this project is funded is that there are the funding sources clearly identified and those are listed out.
Okay.
And then there is the listed costs of the project that take it through to completion.
Yes.
I think the scenario you're trying to paint is what if all of those costs don't come to bear because the scheme is stopped, then how do you apportion the funding for those costs that have already been expended to date? And that's certainly not where we are with regards to the accounting for that scheme to date. So I think you're trying to ask a question which we really don't at this point have an answer for, because what we're assuming is that the project will be undertaken to completion and the funding sources required will be drawn on.
There's been a discussion last week.
Are you satisfied, Chairman Leader, that the funding will be sufficient to cover the costs?
Not, but that's a different question. Toby,
Well,
in terms
I'm saying,
because you won't know that until the 26th of May.
okay. You confident you'll have enough money in your pocket? Is that what?
Having won the lotto, Chair, I council will have to consider these decisions in light of the decision
It's
you
not
make
just to
today.
make.
No. Thank you for that. Kia ora, Peter. Yes, Councillor.
Can I ask a question of Stavros about the wastewater treatment upgrade, Stavros? You've talked about the design, the construction timelines, the discharge into the forest, and we're still waiting on that, that information. So what sort of capacity have you got for the new design? Because I know there's been a big push for RDC for new urban development, urban housing. In terms of capacity of the wastewater treatment plant, what are you building into the new design of the wastewater treatment plant? Additional houses, additional HVACs or whatever you call it.
So can you repeat that question just for
No.
us?
I think the councillor Wilton is asking, is the upgrade treatment plant for the city, what capacity is it designed for? And it's been designed for double the current capacity.
Oh, so it's sort of,
72,000 cubic meters.
We built
So-
it.
oh, right, okay, so it's big.
Yeah.
This is big.
But of course, without getting into technicalities here, to just the treatment capacity depends on flow management.
Oh, yeah.
But the capacity of the plant will be to have 72,000 cubic meters per day to treat for pathogens and to reduce on nutrients at source at the target, the 30 times, the 3 times of phosphorus, without meeting land use volume.
Thank you, Stavros.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So Stavros, just to clarify, you've presented your update report, strategy group, not the Rotorua.
No, that's correct.
Yes, okay, so we just a move and a seconder for Stavros's report on 72.
Can someone move the Stavros's report?
We're just receiving it.
Chairman, yes, just leaving. Chairman, and seconded, Tangiti. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you, Stavros. Thank you. I think it's time for morning tea. Why am I out of line? Right, we have 10 minutes for morning tea. Is there enough time, kids? Yeah, 10 minutes.
Your call, sir.
10 minutes in 30 seconds. Yes, it is. Right. We now will hear the report of Rotorua Lakes Council on the East Rotorua Sewage Reticulation Scheme, funding balance page 31. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Chair. Look, I want to talk a little bit about my reports. I just want to draw the attention of the strategy group to the fact that the recommendations that are in this report are now somehow superseded and parking aside for a minute, pending Fiona's reports that which is subsequent to my report that was written before some discussion has taken place. Basically, my report wanted to draw attention to a couple of things, and I will not be very long, but we started collectively this process of undertaking water quality improvement projects in the Rotorua Lakes for a number of years, almost 17 years at the moment. Parties have undertaken certain types of activities, and from the Rotorua Lakes Council perspective, the reticulation programs were earmarked for various communities around the lakes. Most of you have been around here for a long time, and you know that. So where we are at the moment with regards to East Rotorua is the fact that East Rotorua, it is the last reticulation program that has been earmarked since the early years of the deed agreement back in 2005, 2007, if I'm correct, well before my personal time in this area, but certainly had the opportunity to go through all the history and background. The reality is that with all these wastewater reticulation programs that Rotorua Lakes Council has undertaken to deliver, we are now to the final end of it. And as I said earlier in my update, East Rotorua is progressing, and we've got about 40 installations already in place with a completion program for the next 18 months or so on. What's the discussions we've been having for almost 2 years right now is the fact that in completing Rotorua Lakes Council's wastewater reticulation programs and taking into consideration the initial program of work back in 2005, some $32 million, $32.5 million from the deed funding were allocated to those for that purpose. But 17 years later, if you extrapolate $32.5 million and on the 50-50 contribution perspective, you would think that the wastewater reticulation program should have cost, by the end of its program somewhere in the region of $65 million gross expenditure, where it actually cost $85 million. Now, it doesn't need to be a significant mathematical exercise to anyone's brain to understand that, $20 million for 65 million is about 30% high cost than the estimate that was constructed in 2005. Now, 30% over 17 years, it doesn't equate to more than 2% CCPI inflation alone. It doesn't take into consideration new emerging standards, regulations, compliance costs, and so on. So in assessing the final completion of the projects, the gross cost expenditure of $85 million, it's been identified for to complete this project here. There is a funding gap of about $10 million. Now, that is subject to discussions you will have. And at the same time, it's fair to say that a number of the programs that the Auckland Regional Council has undertaken over the years, for a number of reasons, have been changed. There are cost implications, there are timing implications, and so on. And all these sort of things have got good rationale and valid reasons behind it. For example, land incentive programs have become the predominant, the land management program became the dominant program for Bay of Plenty Regional Council if you compare it to the initial programs in 2005 and 2007. Tarawera, the Tarawera articulation scheme is consistent with the aspirations of this strategy group to, and especially to Arawa Lakes Trust as the lake owners, to ensure that Haru stops leaking into lakes. That is the primary purpose of wastewater reticulation schemes. And Tarawera is another one of these communities that has got septic tanks that's demonstrably leaching into Lake Tarawera. Now, the offices, Loretta, our colleagues from the Ministry of the Environment, are correct. The funding application was initiated back in 2017. Initially, it was, I think, from $10 million, and eventually the ministry only allocated us $6.5 million. Now, what is the story? What is the history behind Tarawera? The advice from the government, from the Crown in 2017, mid-2017, that $6.5 million will be allocated for the freshwater funds for Tarawera. Now, at that point in time, the community and the Rotorua Lakes Council worked together and worked through a long list of options to arrive by 2018, a year later, into a preferred option for which the community agreed to, which it was based on grinder pumps and the option of connecting into existing network. I think that cheerleader asked the question, why wasn't the deeds signed at that point in time and had to wait for the cultural impact assessment? Now, there are two reasons for that. The cultural impact assessments are a necessary undertaking embodying two elements. One is a partnering approach to mana whenua, and the second one is a regulatory approach. You don't know whether you need to enter into a consented scheme or not consented scheme until you construct a cultural impact assessment. The cultural impact assessment is a requirement of resource consent considerations by the regulatory authority, in our case, the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. So therefore, a cultural impact assessment had to be made in order to evaluate whether this proposed scheme needed a consent or not. If an in-catchment treatment plan, for example, was necessary, was required, then a consent would be required. If no in-catchment treatment plan was required, then we could connect to our existing consented network. And therefore, giving effect to our partnership expectations and commitments with mana whenua to seek their opinion about that, we work with Arawa Lakes Trust, led the CIA, and then various mana whenua groups to construct the CIA. Yes, it took 2 years to do that. By late, by 20, I think September 2020, the two rounds of CIAs were completed. It's transpired with agreement of our partners that an in-catchment treatment plan was not feasible for a number of technical and land availability reasons. Immediately after that, our council, Rotorua Lakes Council, has considered that the scheme now is ready to proceed on the basis of constructing low pressure grinder pumps and connected with the Okareka existing consented scheme. Council immediately put it in this draft LTP program in November 2020, and we started a public community consultation as part of the LTP. My colleague Loretta noted that in February we advised the ministry that all these programs of work in terms of preliminary concept, shortlisting of the option, culture input assessment group have been executed. The draft LTP has included this proposal into this forward plan, and now we are in the process of consulting with our community. That was in February 2021. Council, at the same time, duly consulted with the community in partnership with the Tarawera community. And in June 21, the council considered and adopted its final LTP. The final LTP gave two instructions to ourselves, two offices. One is to commence immediately in 21-22 the detailed design of each individual property. The second one to establish a community council officers group to review repayment options. And so we did. At the same time, so we will give you that in effect. In July, as my colleague Loretta said, we advised the MFE that now all this process has been completed and we are going ahead with progressing the design and detailed execution of this project too. And that's our program to be delivered by 2024. It's fair to say that when in August last year, this strategy group met and officers from Ministry of the Environment arrived at this strategy group and reported that they had all the required information. It was fair for us, I think, to assume that the information we provided in July was the required information. We haven't heard from the ministry until October 22, when the minister made a decision on 25th of September, a preliminary decision to say the minister is considering rescinding the Tarawera funding. Now, subsequent to that, discussions, obviously, the parties to the strategy group have sat together and agreed to continue to explore options to avoid that eventuality, because not proceeding with Tarawera, it has other adverse effects and implications on many other parties, both the regional council, Arawa Lakes Trust, the community, and ourselves. So we are at this point in time at the moment which says that we think that the Tarawera scheme progressed systematically through the necessary milestones to achieve a completed project. We cannot fast track processes that we have committed to adhere to, both neither on a partnership level or neither on a consenting level. We have to demonstrate that we went through the exercise to evaluate the various options. We believe that the evidence and the record will show that we provided ongoing advice to our partners in the ministry as to where we are. The deed funding template has changed. I only received an updated template on the 2nd of April. After we got the minister's last letter on the 23rd of March, I had another email from a Ministry of the Environment colleague, which said, now got a new template. Could you please update your July template with work plan and forward it to that? My advice to them is that pending the decisions of this strategy group today, we will have an updated work plan report for you as soon as the strategy group is complete. But of course, from now on, depends on decisions you will make in considering funding with worthwhile programs and what in front of you. There's no question that all these programs are contributing positively towards improvement of water quality. The key challenge here is that how can we navigate forward in a way that's equitable and balanced and provides certainty for all parties to commit contractually into completing this project. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take any questions onto my report. And then Fiona may sort of follow from there.
Thank you, Sarah. Right, questions have been invited, comments? All right,
Can I play out of Peter? It's great to see you up there. I'm reporting on behalf of the partners who met on the 13th of April and unanimously agreed some recommendations, which is a supplementary paper to you. At that meeting, all partners agreed on the importance of lakes water quality. We're talking about 3 lakes here. We're talking about Lake Rotorua, where this strategy group has previously endorsed an integrated framework to remove nitrogen from that lake. That is a multi-year program. It has several years to run, and it is the incentives fund as part of the integrated framework. We're also talking about Lake Rotorua, where there is a $10 million funding gap, and that is Stavros's paper addresses that. And we're also talking about Lake Tarawera, and the only reason we're talking about Lake Tarawera is because the minister has been concerned about project delivery for that lake. The deed is not finalised, and the minister has therefore made a decision to remove funding from this lake to Lake Rotorua. And that is why that lake is being discussed today. I acknowledge that there are differences between MFB and RLC in terms of the information that's been provided, but that is why we're here today. Given the East Rotorua Sewage Reticulation Scheme funding gap, all partners met and they unanimously agreed to some recommendations that is in the supplementary report in front of you. There are 7 recommendations here, and I thank all the leaders involved in terms of getting to that unanimous agreement. Any questions on that supplementary paper?
Could I signal, and thank you for that, Fiona, and could I also thank those that organised this meeting to delay it to today to allow us to have that meeting on the 13th of the 4th. That was robust and not an easy meeting, but it was the first time I believe the 3 partners really got together to look at the whole program going forward. I moved the recommendations 1 to 7, but I did indicate that I wanted to speak to 3 to 7. Point 3 and point 7. And if I could do that now, Fiona, I'd like to. Point 3 is seeking the minister to agree 10 million of deed funding be reallocated from the incentives fund to the Rotorua sewage scheme funding shortfall on the basis that RLC commits to being part of a funding solution for the ongoing lakes water quality program through the investigation and consultation of a new rate with proposed implementation July 2023. In that recommendation, we're trying to give certainty through to the ministry that we see there needs to be a change in allocation of funding. But as the mayor and outgoing in October, there is no way other than signalling an intent. So while we talk about the targeted rate, I can own it's completely ultra vires for me as the mayor to agree to this without talking to our council and to look at, does it trigger significance for us to have to go out to consult next year in our long-term plan with the community. We have finished consultation on year 2 of our long-term plan, where we agreed to the continuation of Tarawera. So this is a solution that we agreed to in principle, but we differ in the fact that I cannot give a certainty as an outgoing mayor that I have the support of council after the election, and there'll be very different people around that table, as to their support for a new targeted rate. We saw that as a good mechanism and agreed in principle, but I cannot tie in a future council over a mechanism of a targeted rate. So I wanted to speak to that upfront, and very happy that it's out to the public. I also wanted to speak to 7, and I feel quite strongly to this. We put in 7, we agreed to review and create appropriate terms of reference for improved project oversight and reporting for all partners. And I think that goes back to very much agreeing to a future review of the work programme. It has been implied that project management wasn't up to scratch, and I took exception to that very strongly. But do agree that project oversight is something that the 3 partners through this programme can ask and have an improved role in for all partners in the Lakes programme. I also, I didn't understand 5, noting the current strategy group review, Fiona. I didn't know there was a current strategy review underway, but we wouldn't be opposed to that. But we would suggest there that we are made more aware of what work is underway together, and also look to make funding available for Te Arawa Lakes Trust to have a more active part in the future review. So we got to these 7 recommendations, and I must put on the table that there is no way I can, and neither does a mayor have the power to commit to a targeted lakes improvement rate. We like it as a mechanism, but I have to take that back to council, and it will be an incoming council after the election in October that will have that discussion and we'll have to agree on that. So that's our only point of difference after a very robust meeting that we had. And I thank Te Arawa Lakes Trust for hosting us in your space, where we were able to have very safe and valued discussion together about the future of this very important programme of work. So we certainly recognise the importance of the lakes to our people and communities. We recognise the importance of the lakes programme moving forward. We do seek that change to the Minister to agree to 10 million of deed funding to be reallocated from the incentives fund to the Rotorua sewage scheme funding shortfall, on the basis that we commit to being part, Rotorua Lakes Council does commit to being part of the funding solution for the ongoing lakes water quality programme through the investigation and consultation of a new Rotorua Lakes Council rate with proposed implementation for July 2023. We agree to the future review of the work programme and the role of the strategy group. So we all agree with that. And I do think we could move a resolution that the funding flow through Te Arawa Lakes Trust. And we seek the Minister to rescind his decision to retain 6.5 for Tarawera for freshwater improvement funds. And we agree to review and create appropriate terms of reference for improved project oversight and reporting for all partners. So it really summarised Toby and our presenters that we've been saying for some time at previous resolutions last year on 3 occasions where we thought we could move funding from the incentives fund, that it's time to review the work of the strategy group. The partners of the group to be more active together and actively engaged with the Ministry for the Environment, but for us to review the purpose and the role of the strategy group. And I think with John Gifford's presentation this morning, that raised also that could be part of how we look at the review of the strategy group. So they are the issues that I wanted to speak to, and wanted to assure to you, Loretta, that That is the firmest commitment that Rotorua Lakes Council can give to the minister because of the elections and because I'm not standing again to be the mayor. So I hope that's helpful to everybody.
Very good. Thank you, Your Worship. Comments, Corleo, Murape. Councillor Lee.
Kia ora tātou. Firstly, Mayor Chadwick, sorry.
I moved that way. Do I have a second?
Oh,
Second.
seconded, Councillor Donaldson. Right,
So
so
it's
for
open for
discussion.
Right, thank you, Tātou. So look, could I applaud your pragmatism in terms of trying to get this through, Mayor Chadwick, but from my position, it's not tight enough. So by way of background, and I thank Stavros for his enunciation of the journey here. I think we'll agree to disagree on some of the project dynamics, but that's not on the table today because we've got what we've got. We've got two issues here to resolve. The first is the Rotorua, East Rotorua shortfall in terms of funding, and the other is the Tarawera issue. They are separate, but they are interlinked. But I just draw your attention to page 37 of Stavros's original report, which essentially said that RLC is the regulatory authority, it's a territorial authority, supported and asked the regional council to put in place a targeted rate to supplement the shortfall in the Rotorua East Rotorua project. For the life of me, I cannot understand why that would get prominence when the regional council had no part of that contractual arrangement. And I can pass that, but I wonder why, if you're comfortable as RLC that the regional council should strike a rate proportioned to every Rotorua constituency ratepayer, why you wouldn't want to do it yourselves. So I just leave that on the table as a particular issue. The other issue that, again, it's your call, it's not ours, but I question the logic in terms of appropriating, which I presume is in your annual plan, because Stavros has said you've actually committed work, of taking $2 million from your Three Waters agreement with the Crown in terms of your first tranche of funding, which I think comes out in July. You've appropriated $2 million to setting up the design and mains installation of Rotorua, but you've said we haven't been able to secure any more funding to complete it, which is another $6 million if your $8 million is right, and you're going to put the whole thing on ice. And I'm sitting here thinking, why would you do that as opposed to appropriating that $2 million towards your operating for your capital cost shortfall? Because Rotorua can essentially be a bolt-on. Because if you're going to sink $2 million into that, which I understand from Stavros that you've actually committed, and then you're going to put it on ice till you can secure funding, which all probability is not likely to occur until you have the Three Waters entity stood up, which will be post 24. And I'm thinking, is that the best use of that sort of money? But anyway, that's your decision, but it's an issue that I look at in terms of the best allocation of the capital to meet the shortfall. So I think, Stevie, in terms of your resolution 3, I think it needs to be a bit tougher, because representing the regional council, I will not commit to something that leaves the regional council as the last man standing in terms of finding $10 million. If we agree to ask the minister to reallocate funding, I will not agree to the regional council being the last man standing in the event the future entity, whether it's regional council or Rotorua Lakes Council, is unable to come to the party. Yes, at the end of the day, this is about best intent, integrity, and I would imagine that if you, as the outgoing mayor and your outgoing councillors, go to a new council or leave instructions to a new council, you're right, you can't commit them, But there has to be an intent here that says on the basis of goodwill in the interest of the lakes and the wider community, that we need to do this. And I think the addition to that is the minister's expectation will be, and I think you could put it in paper, that a future entity commits and picks up this commitment from Rotorua Lakes Council. At the moment, I think it's a bit woolly, and could I suggest, if you are prepared to consider, the last line where it says the funding, RLC commits to being part of the funding solution for an ongoing lakes water quality program through the investigation and consultation of a new targeted rate.
Rotorua Lakes Council targeted rate.
Yeah. With proposed implementation for July 2023 for the purpose to reimburse the incentives fund from which these funds have been withdrawn. From a regional council perspective, you must give us acknowledgement that to agree to take $10 million from the incentives fund without a clear line of sight in terms of where are we going to get that repaid from is a big ask. And I think if you do a quick calculation, your targeted rate, I think that I saw in the spreadsheet here, is something like $20 a year, $30. If you took it up to 40, and this is all subject to further consultation.
Well, that's the point.
Then you get your $10 million. But that's what I need to ensure. Regional council is not left as the last man standing, and other authorities walk away from this. And I think, as I said the other day, the role of Te Arawa here is to keep the commitments that we make here today, both current and future governance bodies, keep us honest in terms of what we commit to. So that's in terms of Rotorua Rotorua. I agree with you in terms of retaining the funds in Tarawera. My only issue in Tarawera, and it refers to what may well be intended in item 7, in bullet point 7, which is appropriate terms of reference for improved project oversight. Now, you were, I think, referring to the oversight of the combined projects that we have run through this strategy group.
Yep.
We were more, in my position, I think my council's position is more in terms of capital projects that may be implemented in the future. Now, in defence of Tarawera residents, if this project proceeds in the current financial constraints of $22.5 million, and we net out the costings from ourselves, as well as the Freshwater Improvement Fund, those residents are up for in excess of 70% of the capital cost of that project. I think we've got to get out of our current thinking and think a new domain, whereby if that's an expectation of our local community, surely it is reasonable to at least give them the opportunity to be part of a capital project implementation group. I know it's challenging, it's going to be challenging for the executive, but let's be honest here, is that the Freshwater Improvement Fund that was put in place by Tarawera was prepared by them together with Guy Salmon. And the only reason that RLC is the lead on this project is because you're the regulatory authority, the territorial authority that oversees that. But it was Tarawera residents together with Guy Salmon that prepared that application and submitted it. So I think, Mayor Chadwick, as I said, congratulations, and I applaud you for the pragmatism in trying to get this, and that's the only issue I've got. I'd like to see reference to a RLC targeted rate there for the purpose of reimbursement of the incentive scheme, or a similar wording, but the same intent. Thank you, Tatobi.
Very good. Thank you, Doug. Anyone like to add to what Doug has said or disagree with Doug?
So, Sir Toby.
Yes.
Doug, are you moving an amendment to number 3 in terms of those extra words.
So Mayor Chadwick has made a recommendation
Yep.
that should change from the original one, not seconded by Deputy Mayor Donaldson, and Chairman Leader made amendments, so we need a seconder for his amendment.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that.
So I've got that up on the screen. Is that something that you would be happy with? There you go.
Can I ask, Mr. Chairman, Lorena, can you see those new changes to number 3?
Yes, yes, I can.
So I'm looking at this from the minister's point of view. Will those resolutions, those 7 resolutions, with the amendments that we've got today from the strategy group, will that give the minister confidence to proceed with the 2 schemes? Because this is not about us today. This is about giving the minister confidence that he can rescind the 6.5 million, keep it with Tarawera, and commit to the incentive, the 10 million from the incentive scheme to be paid back by RDC in future times. Does that give you?
Yes, I would say that he'd be comfortable with that. I mean, when I presented earlier, he said he is open to reversing his decision, but he wanted to have some confidence around how the shortfall for Lake East Rotorua would be, the reticulation project would be met, and also the confidence that the delivery of Lake Tarawera project would be managed in a way that would ensure that we'd see the benefits of that investment. So I think he would be comfortable with that.
Okay.
Loretta, just on Councillor Winters there, with the assurance, I would request that we have a meeting as soon as it can be arranged for the 3 parties to come to discuss the intention going forward with the minister.
Sure. Yes,
So
we can.
it's very clear.
Yes, we can include that in our update to the minister, Mayor Chadwick.
So, Turby, could I just, I'd rather have some discussion as opposed to a formal, put a resolution, second it, because I think, Stevie, you have to recognise if we're able to achieve this, and you put in the RFC, puts in the targeted rate at the current $30, it's going to take 10 years to repatriate $10 million. In the meantime, the cost to the regional council will be, we have to allocate out the incentive scheme by 27. So we are going to actually, as the regional council, going to have to cash flow the shortfall for another 5 years. That's what's currently proposed. And it may be that you don't do it for $30, you might do it for 40, but those are ongoing discussions that I think we need to have.
I suggest that that's a discussion that our council needs to have. If we, by intent, are agreeing to a future review of the work program and funding, that is where that should be encapsulated, rather than getting caught on being very specific about reimbursement. Who knows what funding opportunities are going to be ahead of us, especially with Te Mana o Te Wai and freshwater improvement funding and any government decision. None of us can commit to that, and we never did with our commitment to our program on Tarawera. So that wasn't in our forward thinking of thinking we could hook extra money in at that stage. But I think if we agree the strategy and the program and the capital costs contained in the program oversight, then that says it all. And it's for each individual council to agree how they strike whatever rate they strike. And we have to do that in consultation with our communities and test the community.
Any further discussion?
Sorry, I don't agree, Stevie, because you refer to the program. To me, the program is the comprehensive suite of activities that come through this body to fund. What I'm referring to here is the cold clinical fact of how do we reimburse, or how do we fund a shortfall of $10 million, and how do we reimburse it?
So
and it's too woolly to leave it as a overarching program of work. in my view.
I don't agree with you at all. I think the question, and we broke down very much the questioning of the effectiveness of some of the interventions that we committed to this program and the funding. We went through the spreadsheet about what has actually been spent to date and asking, are we getting a good outcome for our lakes water quality? I think that was very much the point that John Gifford made. That's the challenge that we need to do when we review the purpose and the role of the strategy group. That will encompass all of those aspects, and I agree that they must be brought up to date. That deed funding agreement is now so old, and we've all agreed we've got to get it refreshed and up to date, and it includes future capital spends.
I think Fiona?
Yes, through you, Chair. I think you're talking about both short-term, medium-term and
That's right.
long-term change. So the recommendations, as it stands, 3 and 7 and 6 are about today.
Yep.
Recommendation 4 and 5 are about tomorrow.
Yep.
So in fact, even though they're shorter recommendations, they will have much more bearing on the lakes and their communities in terms of that medium-term to long-term change. So just to be clear, we've got recommendations in front of us about today.
No,
And then there are
Fiona,
recommendations for tomorrow.
yeah, no, I don't agree. 3 talks about implementation in 2023. That's not today. That's what I've tried to make very, very clear, that we like the mechanism of a targeted rate for lakes water improvement, but there's no way I can commit a future council to that today.
I realise that, Stevie, and I made those comments, but
Yes.
as I said, I will not leave $10 million reallocation of funding to the last man standing
With a line of sight.
for the line of sight. There has to be some surety, to the degree that we can, that $10 million will be reimbursed. And you know what the consequences, we all know what the consequences, if we do not reimburse that, and we can have a discussion with the Crown where they want to come to the table, but the Minister has today just clearly said no. If we are unable to reimburse that $10 million, all your rural landowners around the caldera of Rotorua Lakes Council will have to take another big haircut in terms of the discharge to Lake Rotorua to meet the target that we have to meet. Now, you might not be here to have that discussion with them. I won't be here to have that discussion with them, but someone's going to look back and say, what were those people thinking of back then? That's all I'm asking for.
But I won't discuss the effectiveness of the investment and the improvement program to date, and its yield of effective outcomes. But I think we're only caught on this one highlighted amendment.
And through you, Chair, it's very clear, it's about a process, recommendation 3. It's
I'm
about a
well aware of
process
that.
in terms of investigating consulting of a new RLC targeted rate with proposed implementation for July 2023. So it's making a decision today for a process that will take to July 2023 to implement.
Yes, Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could just comment that position of mover and seconder from Rotorua Lakes Council is we're happy up to 2023. But for the purpose of reimbursement of the incentives fund, preempts points 4 and 5, where we're agreeing to a future review of the work program and strategy group review. So I think that preempts what the future work program might look like after a review. So if that bit was dropped, we're okay.
So can I respond to that, Tatobi?
Yes, please.
The response to that is that embedded in agreements with your community is Plan Change 10. Sitting behind Plan Change 10 is the agreement with the community to reduce nitrogen load into Lake Rotorua by 320 tonnes by utilising $40 million to buy that nitrogen. And for the life of me, I'm not a planner, but I would think if you want to go back and revisit Plan Change 10 and change that, well, best of British to you, because look how long it took us to put in place. And I don't think that's unreasonable, because the science, as John Gifford said, that was put in place to justify that position was pretty comprehensive. And in response to the issue about whether or not we have invested in programs of activity to get outcomes, maybe we haven't, and I think a good one is Tikateri, but we are not central government, whereby if you appropriate money, it's got to be spent in that financial year. I would expect the staff across the whole tripartite arrangement here, and we need to elevate the importance of Te Arawa here, that we do not spend money for the sake of spending money. We spend it on good science. And if we have to park some initiatives that we thought initially we were going to do, then that's what we should do. But I think the issue that we should revisit Plan Change 10, if I've got this right, and I'll seek the few of my colleagues, Fiona and the staff who do this, if you want to revisit Plan Change 10, I think you really need to understand what we're proposing here.
So I see the nub of this now. It's come out now that the regional council's concern is the land use change as outlined in PC10. I get that, that's your major concern with the shift in funding. If you agree to future review of the work program, which is 4, and specify in there the shortfall of land use incentive scheme, specify it. So it's stated that addresses your concern. We're not asking for a review of PCT. We understand it. We have had questions and been very frank with you about the effectiveness of how much has been invested in land use change, but that's a story for another day. I think if you took that out of there and put it into a future review of the work program, including the funding shortfall of the land use investment scheme, land use incentive scheme, I'm happy for it to be there.
Can I make a suggestion? Because I think this is starting to get down into words. And the fundamental concern that I'm hearing is assuring ongoing funding availability for the scheme, the land use change scheme, if you want to specify it further. I think that would be more appropriate wording than the concept of reimbursing the incentive scheme. And the reason I say that is that it's introducing a notion of reimbursement. And I think we've heard before, and Stavros has talked about this on many times, that the deed talks about a 50-50 funding ratio for work that is actually undertaken, and that the current work program takes priority over out years. So this is actually the first part of this recommendation deals with the allocation of deed funding. The second part of the recommendation deals with assuring adequate funding is available for the continuation of the scheme. And that's the sort of wording that should be used. It means that you're addressing the concerns, I think, Chairman Leader, that you've got about being clear that this is about assuring funding for the ongoing ability of the scheme. And I think you're addressing the Chadwick's view that actually we've got a work program review here needed. And this is not about just reimbursing a scheme that we're looking at today, because that may actually change. So you're actually addressing both issues.
I disagree, and I'll have to seek the advice of those people who do this every day, because my understanding is $40 million allocated to buying nitrogen as part of Plan Change 10 was pigeonholed, safe harbored for that particular purpose. And I don't think that it is the role of any one of us to challenge that without understanding the implications that's behind it. So I'll defer to my chief executive as to whether I've got that right or not. But
Fiona, before you speak, and I want to say it in here, I think we got there the other day when we said we recognise the importance of lakes to our people and our communities, and we recognise the importance of the lakes program going forward. I would certainly include in there PC10, it's not, we don't want to go to war with a very innovative rural sector. Don't need to. We agree with it, but we have got a funding shortfall. I think what you're trying to do is tangle it up in what is a sewage scheme, and essentially we're saying we'll complete that sewage scheme, we'll keep Tarawera going, and then we'll address the shortfall in other programs in their whole entirety. And if you want it specified, I'm happy for that to be specified. You're so near.
An analogy.
Yeah. Yeah, ensure.
An analogy, Stevie.
Yeah.
You expect us to be the bank through the regional council and our oversight of the incentive scheme. I just want to know when you're going to get paid back.
Can I just raise that? You mentioned that the introduction of a rate would result in a 10-year payback period. That's not my understanding about what would actually in fact be undertaken here. The purpose of the rate would be to actually look at repaying debt funding. Because what will happen is that if we set a rate, or set, if you like, first off, and a quantum of funding available, the availability that was needed, and that funding was available in year one, let's say, then that would have to be debt funding. So the purpose of the rate is to retire the debt funding, not to actually provide funding availability necessarily to the work program. So in other words, the funding is available immediately, is the short answer.
I understand that, but this involves our colleagues as well, and I'm a bit of a standing on bloody top of the mountain by myself here.
I think you know.
But you have got $40 million, which my understanding was allocated by the Crown for a particular purpose, which was to buy nitrogen out of Lake Rotorua. If we're to get agreement from the minister that we can reallocate some of that money,
and it must be,
then he's going to say, don't come back to me asking for more money to fill that gap. He's going to say, how are you guys going to ensure that that $10 million is reappropriated for the purpose that it was? That's the only thing I'm looking for.
I think.
And to date, I don't have that surety.
I think with respect, you've jumped, you're looking at a payback, whereas I'm saying that we need to look at a targeted lakes, freshwater improvement rate. That will be ongoing till a future council decides, and we're never going to be there, Doug, with the improvement of our lakes water quality. That is the commitment that we give. So it will be used for other purposes. Who would have thought when we started this program in 2005 that we'd be here in 2022 still saying that the quality of our lakes needs ongoing investment and commitment from us all? I think in 20 years' time, we're still going to be doing it. This will be striking something quite new for Rotorua Lakes Council. That's a commitment.
I understand where you're coming from, Stevie, but as we said before, we are dealing with two things here. We're doing future investments, which you referred to as a targeted rate, which someone else will decide how it's going to be appropriated. I'm dealing with the here and now, which is you want $10 million.
Yep.
And the $10 million, well, the easiest option is sitting in the incentive scheme. Not that it's unallocated, because we've got through 2027 to do this. We could walk out of here and there's 6 people lining up tomorrow. For some of that food
years here.
Sorry?
We've been saying that for many years and we haven't spent it, but you know.
Well, how much have we spent? How much have we spent?
Well, on land management.
Incentive scheme buying nitrogen.
Oh, we call it land management. So
it's the incentive scheme.
We've got to call it apples and apples. I think we're agreeing.
We've spent about 20%. Sorry, 50% of it. And if you look at, as the driver for some of these economic changes are things like the carbon price. So when we went the first tranche of probably 25%, Kevin, I think 25, 30% was when the carbon price was down at $10 or less. The carbon price is now trading at $70. And you can imagine all those farmers out there are looking at land use change and saying, The economics are starting to stack up here. Now, I can't forecast what the carbon price is going to do, but if it stays at 70 or it goes to 100, the incentive for a lot of that land use change is going to roll up at the regional council's door and say, we want a discussion about you to buy our nitrogen. And I'm saying, if we take $10 million, we're going to be short.
No, I agree
Now,
with
the
you.
regional council's position is maybe that as the body charged with overseeing the disbursement of that money, maybe we, I haven't spoken to my council or my colleagues about this, have to accept that we need to cash flow that as the repayment comes back into reimburse that incentives fund.
Thank you. Fiona and Tony.
Just a minor amendment, which I think captures the discussion. But if you have after 2023 a bracket, including for the purpose of reimbursement of the land use incentive scheme, which is capturing all of your wording, it's including, but it's not exclusive to. I think that is what you've been talking about.
If you want it stated, I get it.
I'm happy with that.
You happy with that? Tony?
Well, it sounds like everybody's happy with that. I was really just going to refer to the incentive program, and as I understood it originally, it was a 50-50 investment from the Crown and Bay of Plenty Regional Council to achieve 329 tonnes of nitrogen. It contributed the total figure by date, so that in fact it was an acceptable sort of nitrogen leaching regime that was trying to be reached. And so on that basis, I mean, I'd be interested in what the MFE as the other investment partner might have a view on that particular space, if they're prepared to comment on that now. Because part of that commitment is their commitment too, and our ability to work this space. So Lorena, do you have a view on that?
I do have you. Sorry. I think you're right if we separate the two issues here, and that's a good way that we would put it back through to the minister. I think the Lake Tarawera reversal of his decision from last year, we could put that to him and I think he'd be fine. He is interested to see how we deliver on the objectives of the program. So if his interest will be that this, as long as this is sorted and agreed to amongst councils, he'll be fine with making the changes. I think there is an element of stepping out the process for him, just given the time constraints and noting that the local elections are happening. So I think, we could put that through to him and he'd want a commitment from the strategy group in terms, I think the fact that there's also a strategy review will go some ways as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lorena.
Lorena.
Sorry.
The question to Lorena in terms of the 6.5 for Tarawera, we'd absolutely probably want that firm or a firm commitment from the minister around that 6.5. I think that's pivotal. And I don't know how the surety to be able to give to us ASAP.
Yeah, I think the 6.5 issue in terms of you've put some recommendations around item 7. I think that will that will give him some assurance around how that's going to be managed. One of the things around the 6.5 in the work program, there are some items, we don't do retrospective funding, so there are some items within that have already been delivered. So working with Stavros and the team and others to work through what we could do to meet the short-term need, noting we'd want to execute that, given we've extended it beyond the 5 years that was intended. We'd work with them to try and make that commitment through the work program so that the 6.5 would be invested over a 2-year period as opposed to extending it right out.
So can you explain that retrospective aspect again?
So in the work program that was presented in your papers, there are some activities that have already occurred. So we have to revisit the work program to actually ensure that the activities that we're investing in, and it might be that we look at the construction element of it for Lake Tarawera, would have to be removed from the work program. We cannot fund activities that have already occurred.
Can I say, thank you, Loretta. I think your latest time frame that given to us in April requires us to spend that $6.5 million all on construction in 22-23. That's what, but we'll discuss, okay? That's fine.
I just wondered through the chair, Loretta, would it give the minister comfort too if we asked that Te Arawa Lakes Trust should lead the review of the strategy and the program?
I think for the strategy group to determine that, I think the fact that you're doing a strategy review, given the challenges of finding the shortfall, would be timely. But I would defer that through to the strategy group to make that call as to how best they manage the review.
I would like that added to our recommendations 8, that we recommend that Te Arawa Lakes Trust should lead the strategy and program review. And probably we're saying that should be funded equally between Regional Council and Rotorua Lakes Council to enable that to happen.
Sorry, in terms of process, can you just go back to recommendation 3? With the amendments, we've had a mover and a second for the amendments. I just need agreement from the floor. Is that the right wording?
But they need to be taken together. I understand that. We're discussing around 1 to 7, and then 3 becomes much clearer.
But there was amendments made by Chairman Leader and Councillor Winters. So I just need the floor and the committee to say, is that acceptable?
So why don't we go through 1? Everybody's in agreement at 1?
Yeah.
You better run this, Helen, or Tatobi. Just tick them all off.
Okay, so that's good. Right, so we've got recommendation 1, which is recognising the importance of the lakes for our people and communities. We've got recommendation 2, which is recognise the importance of the lakes program moving forward. 3, seeking the minister. We've got it in red there. Seeking the minister to agree to 10 million of deed funding be reallocated from the incentives fund to the Rotorua sewage scheme funding shortfall on the basis that RLC commits to being part of the funding solution for the ongoing lakes water quality program through the investigation and consultation of a new Rotorua Lakes Council targeted rate with proposed implementation for July 2023, in brackets, including for the purpose of reimbursement of the land use incentive scheme. And then there's
so we got agreement on that.
Yep.
Great.
Okay, so if we just go to 4, 5, and 4, agreeing to a future review of the work program. 5, noting the current strategy group review.
So can I just interrupt because Stevie wanted to put in here the Te Arawa lead,
Lakes Trust lead,
the future review of the work program, or the strategy group review.
Both. It's local.
Well, it's a big ask for Karen and Jeff.
It's a substantive change, and I think it is heralding the growth of the ability of Te Arawa Lakes Trust to lead.
Look, we've looked at this very closely, Doug, Stevie, and we just we're confident we can come to the party on this, so it hasn't gone without any deep considerations.
Right.
So Te Arawa Lakes, so we're changing that to Te Arawa Lakes Trust leader review of the work program.
And could I add there that funding support be equally shared between Rotorua Lakes Council and Regional Council for the purposes?
Can I ask that because we are referring these 2 items to Te Arawa, let's run the 2 together.
4 and 5.
Run 4 and 5 together with the addition that these programs to be led by Te Arawa in consultation with partners.
Happy for that.
Yes.
Happy with that, Karen? Very. 6 stands.
And funding.
So that was seeking the minister to rescind his decision and retain 6.5 million for Lake Tarawera for freshwater improvement funds. 7, agreeing to improve project management with all partners involved.
I'm sorry, Doug, to go back, or Chairman Leader or Chairman Computers. With 4 and 5 rolled together, we need to put the funding support.
Yes.
I've got hands up.
Sorry, we've got other Peter on the, so.
You want to say something, Ana Peter?
Getting behind is not.
Kia ora tātou. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I can hardly see
Kapai.
you.
I'm okay with the recommendation around TAUT leading the review of the work program and the strategy. My only comment here though is that there's probably some worth in having some independent eyes on there, because we're all part of the program and we might find we did something wrong, council, Lakes Council, Regional Council, whatever, and us having to deliver that message isn't so good in terms of our relationship. So I just wonder in terms of we can lead the process, but maybe we bring back the scope of that process to the next meeting and where there should be some independent review in here. I think some independence in this would be useful for us, some fresh eyes looking at it.
I totally agree.
And I can support that too, Mr. Chairman, because we've had reviews of the strategy by the guy from Taupo in previous lives. So, yeah.
Kapai Ana Peter. Can that be put into the?
So at the moment, we've got those 2 recommendations, sorry.
We still haven't got the funding.
We've still got the funding in there, so the proposal is that we add with funding support from the council partners.
And anything.
It's nice, we'll try.
All right, happy with the recommendation?
Is that, sorry, just, is there a word, I'll just read it out. So noting the current strategy group review, agreeing to a future review of the work program, told to lead strategy program and strategy group review. Is there a word missing there? Is that what we were? With support from council partners, with funding support from council partners and MFE.
Well, what if you put and say, noting the need for a current strategy group review, including a review of including a future review of the work program to be led by Tom. Just tidy it up. Same intent.
So we could
just read better.
We could noting the need for a strategy group review. There is something, you recall we had that workshop in Nukatiapiapi last year when we had the deed requires we have these independent quality assurance audits. And as a result of that workshop, we had Stavros, Mariana and I were working on a internal look at that and responding to the recommendations in our workshop. But I think we came to the conclusion we've moved past that now, particularly with the presentation from Wastewater Quality Society this morning. So this neatly tidies all of that up. Yeah. Okay. So noting the need for a strategy group review and agreeing to a future review of the work program. Told to lead the strategy program and strategy group review with funding support from council partners.
Are we all happy with the wording of the recommendation?
And then the final ones.
Okay.
Yeah. So seeking the minister rescind his decision and retain 6.5 million for Lake Tarawera and then agreeing to improve project management with all partners involved.
I just wish to put an amendment agreeing to improve project oversight. That's the role of this commission.
Please, management. Yeah.
So that's the 7.
All right. Do you want to put it to the vote now and we get approval or disapproval? Do you want to have it all the way through again or have it ready enough that I just put it? Well, okay. We'll
Sorry, Mayor Chadwick moved all of them in the beginning, so I just need a seconder to move all of them.
Yeah, we'll just share the love.
Before you put it, Mr. Chairman, Lorena, are you satisfied with the wording to go back to the minister that we're going to get the right result for this strategy group? Because I don't want to be here in 6 months' time, probably won't be here in 6 months, and him not having enough confidence in this group that we've done the right thing.
I think he'll be fine. We did provide him an update earlier just to let him know where we were at in the thinking. So he gave us some guidance, which I shared with you earlier today. So I think he'll be fine with where we've got to or where we've landed with the recommendations.
So what's the wording?
Okay.
Can I just ask a further question, sort of as an aside? When would you look to? I know Arapeta mentioned scoping to go back to the meeting. I'm just thinking, you know, with having somebody come in independent and start that scoping process, when would you think that process would start? Because I'm wondering, from a central government perspective, whether we could provide some assistance, as you always do, towards year end, to get that process underway earlier.
Great. Lorena, could I speak to that? I absolutely believe it's imperative we get moving on that straight away, because that is going to change the way post-election the future partners of the strategy group work together. So it's imperative, if there's elections in October, that this work is done. And thank you for the offer of consider and support.
Yeah. Further to that, Lorena, we will commence at 1 p.m. today.
Okay, that's fine. Yep, that'll be great. Thank you.
And further, before you put the resolution, Mr. Chairman, which I'm sure it's going to go through, the minister has requested a 22nd of April deadline from this meeting. Yeah. So I would like to see the correspondence from this meeting be shared with all the partners from RLC and Regional Council, going back to him to give him the right information, because it's Friday. Yeah, it's Friday. We need this ASAP back down to the minister to abide by his timelines.
Could I also suggest that Lakes Water Quality Society, that they be included in the review?
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
That we note that.
Yeah.
Don't leave it till
No, you think, mate.
Well, who would like to
It's been moved and
move it
seconded.
and second it?
Yeah, that's been
So we've
moved.
got a move, put it to the vote now.
Oh, it's being put to the vote. How do you want to vote?
As you can, mate.
All in favour?
Aye.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Wonderful discussion. Thank you, Lorena. Your input was valuable. Are we nearly finished? Okay. We have a couple more reports. Don't run away.
I'm just thinking about
Thanks.
yeah.
All yours.
Oh, yeah, I could have, I suppose. So, mōre nā ranga kura mā, ko hana kai koinua, he rupuru attachments manager, Takatuna Mahi, koe moana. I'm just here to present the program report regarding the implementation of the program of the Rotorua Lakes program, and just some highlights. So I have a report in your agenda, which you've probably all seen. So I'll just run through that. So I've got several items for approval. a change request related to shifting funds between interventions on Lake Rotorua from alum dosing to weed harvesting. Mahia Tau, which is the annual work program for 2022-2023, the financial year coming up at the beginning of July. And our Pūrongo Ono Marama, which is the 6-month report for the first 6 months of the current financial year. So that's July to December 2021. 2021 it is. So that report, because of the way that these meetings work, that's, you know, several months, 3.5 months, the time frame that's reported on is actually 3.5 months ago. It's just the way that the timing of these meetings work, and they're required to be both of those, the Mahia Tau and the 6-month report, are required to be approved here before they can go to the minister in accordance with the requirements of the deed. So procedural things. So I've just got some highlights. Here's some photos of weed harvesting. The top one being Lake Rotorua, and the bottom being the recent harvesting at the lakefront, which was a great joint response to the weed wash up that smelt bad between the regional council running its weed harvester here, Rotorua Lakes Council having their teams take your digger and truck the weed away for composting, and then the Te Arawa Lakes Trust team, the operations team, getting in the lake and shifting that hard to reach weed, the weed harvester couldn't get to because it was too shallow, into the reach of a digger operating from the side of the lake. So that was an awesome collaborative project. So there's a dashboard in my report, and you've got that in your agenda pack. I won't go through all of the items on there, but a few highlights. Nikki talked about our Toihuariwa Waimari starting in his role in January. Dennis Oskundacha. So he started in January. He was originally coming to this meeting, but because of the change of date couldn't make it. But we'll get Dennis out with you to meet in person, probably not over winter, but in the spring out on the lake. So we'll get, once he's got his feet on the table, he's got some projects going, we'll get out on the lake. I mean, we'll be invited to do that. I've talked about the Rotorua Lakefront community weed removal. We're doing some tree removal in the Nungataha and Waititi streams. It's been going on for a couple of years now, and it continues with Crown funding. So that's great in terms of improving the resilience of those streams from flooding and also the resultant impacts on the lake. We've done some alum dosing. Andy's done some alum dosing at Okaru. That was delayed because of COVID last year, so it's good to have that done the last couple of weeks. We've completed weed harvesting on Lake Rotorua, which is a different aim than the weed harvesting at the lakefront. The weed harvesting at Rotorua is to remove nutrient from that lake. Remove nutrient from nutrient cycling in that lake, whereas the lakefront removal is an amenity focused removal. The organic greenery is operating, so that received funding. You'll recall that received funding under our low nitrogen land use fund. So that's wonderful to see that operating. And I bumped into Hamish a couple of times. Hamish Hodgson, who's running that, and it's getting really good support in the local community. And he also mentioned this, but Tom secured funding from Te Mana o Te Wai for the Tarawera Collective Impact Project, which is sort of the next step to the restoration of the Tarawera catchments on from the restoration plan, which was adopted in 2015 and is well underway in terms of implementation. So one of my recommendations is that you approve this change request. It doesn't change, it's related to funding on Lake Rotorua. It doesn't change the overall spend on that lake this financial year. It's just about moving funding between interventions, so that we could get all of the available weed it is expensive just to dispose of debris. The transport costs are expensive, and we take it out of catchment because that's how we manage the nutrient input to the lake. So we're asking for a total budget of 200,000 there, which will be covered by underspending and dosing. Our Poodle on the Marama 6-month report. Again, that's provided in your agenda pack. It's a basic traffic light report to meet these requirements. We do a full and comprehensive report once a year, which is the Poodle Tau. We start to prepare that now, and that will have a much more comprehensive one from last year as well. That's available to you. That will have a much more comprehensive outline of the state of the lakes in terms of our annual measurements of TLI and things like that. We follow a project management procedure, is setting out project management team, has risks and issues management, which help me determine where each of those projects is at, and provide that traffic light system reporting approach. One thing I'll note about that 6-month report is that for the reporting period, there was no algal blooms on the lake, so the water quality was good. We did have subsequent algal blooms on the Fleecy and Rotorua over summer. So that report doesn't reflect those. And in terms of water quality, we're looking for long-term trends on water quality. So a algal bloom in 1 year perhaps isn't necessarily an indicator of poor quality. We're looking more at those things across a number of years and trends. Our annual work program, Mahi Mahia Tau, that's again prepared in accordance with the deed of funding. So we're talking about the next financial year, July 2022 to June 2023. So there's only going to be 4 deed-funded activities that continue in that plan. The support for Rotorua catchment landowners, that's advice and support, and the low nitrogen land use home committed contracts. We need about 150,000 to finish those things off. We're going to keep working on our constructed wetlands in the Lake Rotorua catchment as part of that integrated framework and progress towards the 320 tonne reduction. The incentive scheme, and as agreed this morning, with the resolutions that work came up with, the risk-ready sewage reciprocation will also be approved as part of the annual work program now. So I think we just want a placeholder in there at the moment on what was presented to you on the agenda, so we can update that now. The other thing that I included in my report for your interest was a report that my team, two subs in my team, our land management team leader, presented to the Regional Council's Monitoring and Operations Committee meeting in March. And it looked at the sustainable land use gains across the whole of the Lake Rotorua catchment in the last 5 years, 2017 to 2022, and really focusing, because and I've heard this mentioned a few times today, what the focus of the operational team that I lead within the Regional Council is to get those changes on the land in the catchment that will deliver those benefits to the lake in the long term. So that report looked at progress. It looked at trees planted, it looked at land retired in the catchment, and it really shows a massive gain in that over those 5 years. And that 5 years is important because that's the time frame that we've been implementing Plan Change 10 and the incentive scheme. So those are incentives, those are things, carrots and sticks that we have in the catchment, but the Regional Council also has grant funding that helps to retire land and repairing margins and improve biodiversity as well. So that's and we've also had other government intervention in that time through Jobs for Nature and billion trees and so on. So that was a really useful report to look at the gains in the catchment in that time. And I've included a table here. So this is just what has been achieved through Regional Council environmental programs. They might have different kinds of funding in them. They might have billion trees funding in them, just depending on how they were funded. They have Regional Council funding in them as well. But for Lake Rotorua, In that time frame, there's been nearly 260,000 native plants funded, 50 kilometres of fencing, 156 hectares, 7 hectares of land use change. That's not including the incentive scheme, I might point out, which is significant land use change in that time. 43 hectares of wetland restoration and 119 hectares of restoration for biodiversity in significant natural areas. So there's a lot of detail in that report, but I think it does demonstrate the significant gains that have been made in that time, and that's the critical driver to that land use change is the critical driver to achieving these targets in the lake. They're going to take a long time to feed through the groundwater to the lake, but if we don't make progress on the land and we don't keep driving that, we won't achieve those targets. Yeah. And I think John also mentioned that David Hamilton had given that presentation about integrated catchment management being important to achieving our water quality gains, and that's exactly what my team is driving with the incentive scheme, with the environmental programs, and getting that land use change on farm, which will make its way to the lake, particularly in Rotorua, but we also do move across all lakes, and there's some information on tailweather in that report you can look at on the tailweather catchment. So this is an example of what that work does. It takes these critical source areas for nutrient and phosphorus, and they're unsuitable for grazing and retires them. I actually wasn't sure if that was the same one, but that's effectively a before and after pic. I'm not entirely sure they're on the same site. I don't think they are, but that's effectively what it does. It's near enough.
Looks good.
Yeah. Yeah. I was looking at thinking there's so many photos and I'm trying to filter through them all. But that's effectively what it does. Yeah. And I just before we go on, I just wanted to acknowledge the work report that Scott prepared in terms of the land use gains and the catchment. I wanted to acknowledge, I did this at the monitoring office meeting too, the input from the late Jeff Hewitt and achieving those across the catchment. Unfortunately, Jeff died suddenly in January, and he was, he could do anything, and my team used him as a contractor on all sorts of tricky jobs, putting in fencing, just all sorts of things, and he's a massive loss to us. And so a lot of that work that's detailed in that report, Jeff's hands are on it. So I just wanted to acknowledge passing it over.
Well done.
Kia ora.
Thank you. Very good. Any questions, comments? We'll start with the lady first.
Congratulations. It's a great report.
Yeah.
Just the response to the lake week, which was so overt and so sudden after the cyclone. I've heard that someone's looking at a barge, so they might be able to get in where the harvester couldn't go. Is that included in your funding?
Yeah, Andy's sorting that out. So
Look, normally, if the lake is at a higher level, the harvester can get in a lot closer. And it came to our attention that if we could get a consent to get a digger in there at an earlier stage, we can push the weed out to the harvester. So that's our intention at the moment, is get consent to do that. And that'll, in fact, minimise the impact of doing that work, because we'll get it out before the weed starts to go rotten, and get it out quickly before it starts to use up the oxygen in the water there, the ecology.
Okay. Just in case, in terms of the algal bloom, you mentioned that there are patterns emerging. Are those patterns relating to temperature change in the water? Do you know specifically? Because obviously when it happens, it's pretty toxic stuff. Shuts down the lakes in terms of access and things like that. Any comment?
Yeah, I sort of tried to get our water quality scientist to tell me what the cause of the algal bloom was, and he wanted me to do that, funnily enough. But temperature change, definitely he agreed things like, and I think I mentioned in my report, temperature change, long hot summers, stormy conditions, blowing, making the nutrient available. one of the things we sort of looked at, kind of considering is there was a lot of more weed spraying in Wastewater just before summer. That could be a factor.
There's someone else.
Yeah, he again would commit to that, but certainly it's a factor. So we're looking for long-term trends. As Andy keeps mentioning, Lake Rotorua has a target TLI of 4.2, which is eutrophic. So you will still get, even at 4.2, you will still get algal blooms. And so we just need to bear that in mind, that the target TLI for Lake Rotorua is actually one in which we could still experience algal blooms from time to time.
So Tato, a bit of a science question. So if you look on page 103 of the data, there's that water quality attributes, and you'll see that what stood out to me is Rotorua is excellent. Rotorua is poor, and I'm thinking, how does that stack up? Is it wrong, or if it's right, is it just that one quality attribute of E. coli, which tells me there's too many ducks downtown
What column was it in?
So if you look at the last column, swimming quality data, you see Rotorua is excellent. I'm thinking that can't be right, but it must be.
Oh, for people.
Oh, that's for fecal coliforms, it's not.
Yeah, but that's the only measurement you for water for swimming.
No, we use cyanobacteria as well, so the blue-green algae. So that blue-green algae is measured by the regional council, and then the Waiteora makes a decision whether there's a health warning or not, which relates to whether you're swimming or not.
What I'm making though, so if you look at the ongoing commentary we have about Rotorua, it's not very good. Yeah, the water quality, given the coli measurement, is excellent.
That's right. The fecal coliform is low.
Yeah,
but the cyanobacteria is high.
But still excellent water quality for swimming.
Only on that. Perhaps we need to clarify that in the way you
Thank you, Andy.
Helen, how does that 4.0 TLI number compare with the quality of the lake back in the 60s, 70s?
Yeah, so that 4.2 is set to achieve that water quality. That's how those target TLIs, the 4.2 for Lake Rotorua was set in our region, in the Twin Wainas regional plan, and in the what we will aim to achieve is that target TLI of 4.2, and that was based on, on advice received about what the water quality was like then, and then put into that to come up with that target of 4.2. So yeah, and it's about being able to use the water effectively. Yeah. So we maintain the program maintains the lake at or around 4.2 at the moment through alum dosing. So in the long term, we want to be able to turn the alum dosing off, and to enable us to do that, that's where the integrated framework comes in with the team change 10 with the incentive scheme to achieve that 320 tonne reduction of nitrogen in the long term and get the lake to 4.2 without having to alum dose.
Yeah, apartheid Arawa.
Oh, yeah, just a question of clarity, Helen, in terms of that TLA figure, I just want to check that I heard you, what you said earlier correctly. Did you say that even at 4.2, we can expect some algal blooms?
Yes, 4.2.
So I'm just trying to understand the logic. So the 4.2 number comes from our understanding of what it was like in 1960s. Did we have algal blooms in 1960?
That was before my time, but
okay, I'll just check in the rationale because it doesn't make sense to me just listening to that commentary.
Yeah, that is. Look, I'd have to go back and check, how the 4.2 was come up with, and what this was set in 2008, so it was a while ago now. But yeah, that was the 4.2 was set to achieve a water quality that that was experienced in around the 1960s based on the observations of people who were around then.
I was around there in 1960s paddling in there, diving for some coda, and the water was pretty clean. And you could almost drink it. In fact, we did swallow a lot of it. So I would suggest that it is really, really a lot different, but you're right, a lot different now in that respect out of it.
And just bearing in mind that the 1960s is a 10-year period, so people I think about 1960 rather than the 1960s. So it's right through to 1970, and the water quality, my understanding is first of all, there was a limited amount of monitoring undertaken in those days because of the time and the state of technology, and secondly, the water quality was changing over that time from 1960 to 1970. So I'm assuming that as you got closer to 1970, the water quality was worse. And then photographs that I have seen in reports of it, one of the big issues there was in fact the weed rather than the algae problems at the lakefront. So there's photographs of people out there with tractors and rakes and forks and stuff digging that out. So I'm not sure we could compare it exactly to that time, but the four parameters that we use of nitrogen, phosphorus, water clarity, and the chlorophyll A are all in the one TLI figure.
So the process that will look at this TLI is the EPSFM process. EPSFM process, the region-wide plan change related to national policy statement for regional water management. And Gemma's actually going to talk about that next. So that's where those, targets, I guess, are set. Strategy group can include that.
Yes, Councillor Winters.
Oh, Helen, page 79, the rural wetland pilot project that's been unfortunately spent a lot of time, energy, staff time, money, and it's been abandoned or not proceeded. We'll just use that word. So I'm just, not for today, but lessons learned in getting the landowner and ourselves working together to do those wetland projects. Some lessons learned from this project on how we can improve that for next time. Yes.
Yes, yeah. I'm sorry, yes, I didn't mention that. I neglected to mention that, but so we had, as part of the wetlands project, we were doing we were planning to, in the next 1 year, construct a rural drain wetland restoration wetland project, and we had a site for that. We were working with the landowner. We've got to the point we finished the detailed design for that, and the landowner doesn't want to proceed, which is a real shame. Lessons learned. That project, that rural drain wetland pilot project, will continue. So we've got two other sites we're looking at now. So it's not that the project won't proceed, it's just that site won't proceed. And the work that's been done to date is actually largely transferable, so it's not totally gone. A lot of the detailed design work will need to be tweaked, but it will still be able to be used. So we're thinking about how we go about with the next site in terms of doing that. The other sites we've got that wasn't multiple Māori owned land, the next sites we're looking at, and we've had preliminary discussions with the landowners are, and I think that will definitely help. We've got aligned values in the way that those parties want to work with Kanohi, and it's an iterative process. You don't have all the answers up front. And that was the challenge that we came to, where we got down to the detailed design and how the thing would be maintained. That was where this landowner started to think, oh, I don't actually want to do that. And so we need people that are open to that sort of adjustment and uncertainty and can work through it with us through that. So,
my understanding, Mr. Chairman, is she's going to proceed with her own, with the wetland on her own bat, which is great. So all is not lost, Helen. For other projects, but
but for it to meet our what we specific requirements, we want to achieve this 50-tonne reduction through engineering solutions. The design of the wetland has to have some specificity around it in terms of how long it holds water for and things like that. So to achieve that nutrient reduction capacity and renewal of plants and things like that, which, so we need to, for us to be able to fund it under that, we need to have that specificity of design.
Thank you, Helen. Look, I wonder if I could bring our discussion with her into a close. We can ask a question and we'll love listening to the rest of the day here, but we still got some more people to present. So thank you very much. Will someone move that Helen's report be received? Seconded, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Yeah, my apologies. And is Ruben here with you?
I think he's on Zoom.
He's on Zoom.
Ruben?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou.
Ka pai. Kia ora, Ruben.
Okay, I will keep this quick because I know it's lunchtime. This is just a quick update on the Essential Freshwater program and where we're up to on visions. The next slide.
Oh, you've got the.
Oh, I've got it. Oh, there we go. That makes it a lot easier. Oh, there we go. Okay, this is just the same sort of slide I show you every time. This is the space that I work in, the National Objectives Framework. At the moment, we are talking about visions. We've collated a lot of values from our existing documents, and last year we had online engagement where people could add to that and provide some commentary on whether they were happy with the current state of those values or not. We're working towards some environmental outcomes, and the initial ones of those will be based on existing documents, the engagement we get from iwi and hapu, the engagement we get from our online forum, and based on NPSFM bottom lines as well. So there's banding of the attributes in the NPS, which require us to meet certain ecological bottom lines, and where we're not meeting those, we will have to improve. This will flow on to setting target attribute states for a number of contaminants, and then we'll work out how we're going to achieve those target attribute states. So at the moment, for example, the TLI targets we have, the lakes would be one of those attributes that we are going to carry on with. And so people wanted to relook into those TLIs. This would be the opportunity for that, but we'll also have those components broken up. So there will be nitrogen targets, phosphorus targets, chlorofluoride targets as well. This one just shows you sort of the work program over the next 5 years. It's been heavily focused on science and technical work at the moment, engaging with iwi. Our community engagement has primarily been online up until next year. We are planning on intensive public engagement. We are hoping to have some policy options developed this year that we can share with the community next year. This is just to give you a little bit of information on what we got from our online engagement last year. The Rotorua Te Arawa Lakes FMU was the most popular one that we got feedback on, and there were 120 contributions, and 6 of those were unhappy with the current state for a mix of reasons: weed, water quality, and interest in more involvement with mana whenua, and a range of values: ecosystem health, recreation, human contact. What else have we got? Yeah, Waitapu, natural form and character, mahi and fishing. And so the information that we've got from that and from the engagement we have coming up will help draft those environmental outcomes that we will be going out to the community with as a start point for next year. So this is just a little prompt. We have online engagement that will be coming up towards the end of April, so in the next week or two, that will be going live. And that's an opportunity for people to share their long-term aspirations for freshwater. And so I encourage anyone to encourage their networks to go onto that site, participate for plenty, and provide feedback. We're sort of asking questions like what improvements they like to see for freshwater that they care about, and when they would like to see this happen, and what we need to protect that they're potentially already happy with. So yeah, hopefully we get some good feedback on that. So that will be shared through a range of different means, Facebook, Instagram, sent through to all our newsletters around our Rocky, which goes into the local newspapers.
Just remind me, Gemma, how long is that open for?
Open for 2 months at this stage. So we left the other one open for longer last year to just get through all the co-governance groups that we wanted to present it to as well, and give people as long as we could. This one, yes, I'll say 2 months at this stage, but who knows, flexible. I would note we do need to keep moving with this process, so ideally we'll be pushing to try to get people to provide feedback within 2 months if possible.
Dave, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Gemma, you talked about the targets under the TLI.
Yes.
For nitrogen, phosphorus and chlorophyll A.
Yes.
Chlorophyll A being, is that what's called turbidity?
So no, what's the other?
I can give you a bit of an explanation briefly on that. It's a proxy for how much green algae is in the lake. Right, yeah. So it's just
and so my question is, will you also have an E. coli
yes.
target under that TLI?
So okay, so there are a bunch of compulsory attributes under the National Policy Statement for Freshwater, about 14 or so. And on top of that, we may have additional attributes that we might recommend, say Koda, Kakahi, whatever they might come up with. So E. coli, we will have 2 different E. coli numbers. We'll have one for our primary swimming spots, and we will have one that's a year-round E. coli number as well. We have information on all of those attributes that's now available through our website. So I think it was included in my paper, and if it wasn't, we can send the link out to you. But it's called the WET tool, and it shows you trends and current state and of E. coli, nitrogen, phosphorus, and you can see it's sort of like a red light traffic system, red light sort of thing. So where it's red, it's not ideal, and we're going to have to be doing something to improve it. And where it's blue and green, we're a bit more happy. So if you wanted, I could do a demonstration of that at the next meeting, if that was of interest.
Really interesting, and I'd be keen to go online through you, Mr. Chair, just as part of the scope of the work of the Pururinga Reference Group. It's not just about a land disposal site for the treated water from the upgraded treatment plant, but it's also looking at the entire water quality of the Pururinga and all the inputs in the catchment. And E. coli is one that we've had some red flags pop up with.
Yeah.
Principally ruminant and avian E. coli. So thank you. Interesting.
Okay, so visions under the NPS will be set in the regional policy statement, and they will sort of direct the environmental outcomes, rules, etc., that will be in the regional plan. They can be set at a catchment FMU or part of FMU level. So, for example, if it was deemed that the Pururinga catchment wanted specific goals, those could either be at a regional policy statement level or at
the policy level in the regional plan. We need to set timeframes to achieve those goals, and we have not attempted to do that at this stage. And I think all of these things are going to be an iterative process over the next 2 years based on the feedback we get and the implications of the targets that we go for. Process provisions, what's been done so far. So there was a desktop collation of existing documents to come up with an example vision, and we sent letters to Iwi and Hapu back in January to offer the opportunity to have feedback on those. We've had a sub-regional hui, I think that was in February, and when we had the RTLSG meeting scheduled for the 8th of April, we also had a combined iwi hui for all of those that were sent. The letter in January, we invited them to a meeting, so we had about 6 or 7 attend that. And as I said, we've got public engagement coming up.
So when you mentioned 6 or 7,
yeah,
individuals or entities?
Individuals, but those individuals were, I guess, there as mostly as the head of, well, the chairs of the iwi, yeah. So this is the example vision that we shared with iwi in January, and I think shared with you last meeting. Some of the comments we got from the 8th of April meeting was with iwi was that preserved and protected as the vision as the vision document currently says, doesn't really cover the fact that we need to restore the degraded lakes at this time. Support for mahinga kai and Māori being there, but a question of how we're going to measure Māori, which would be wonderful we can answer in the next couple of years. And then the 3 bottom parts are examples of sort of sub-FMU goals, where those catchments have quite different values, I guess. One other thing to note was the importance we've got of just not just focusing on the lakes and being very clear that this is about all water in the FMU.
Can you just ask a question on that, maintaining or improving Māori? You made a comment that almost like it's if only we could measure it. And of course, there's some research programs out there now.
Yeah.
Working towards measuring Māori.
Yep.
And getting that, you're aware of that, and obviously in connecting into those
spaces. Yes, yeah. So I guess I don't know whether Ruben wants to take this one, but I guess the one thing I would say is my understanding is we don't have a region-wide sort of approach happening. So hopefully through our iwi and Hapu engagement, it might be quite specific to rohi or within an FMU, or even multiple groups within an FMU. So where that leads, I'm not sure yet.
Work in progress.
Aye. Kia ora, Councillor White. In terms of your question around Māori, it is interesting in that we are, some of the projects we're working with tangata whenua and is around what those unique indicators are for their wai Māori, and an interesting kōrero to come out of that hui that Gemma was speaking about was, for example, we're taking a look at mahinga kai indicators from a predatory point of view in terms of, say, for example, tuna, where for many of the lake, that is not an appropriate indicator because there are no tuna. So I guess an answer to your question is the more we can understand through a mātauranga lens the uniqueness of each taonga and that tikanga that we wrap around it, then we're more able to answer the question and make provision around how Māori is provided for.
Yes,
Gemma, in our studies, are we looking at measuring the recreational use? And I'm thinking of, in the summertime, we've got record number of boats, jet skis, canoes, stand-up paddle boarders, you know, you name it, they're on the lakes.
Yeah.
Is there a point in time where it's too much? You know, are we looking after them in terms of our recreational access to lakes? It's a hypothetical question, and are we measuring it?
Okay, as far as I know, we aren't measuring that. One of the comments we got last year, as part of the online feedback, was there were a couple of comments about, I really love that I can use my boat here, and then a couple of comments like, I really love that boats can't, there's no water standing on this
Okotan is a
boat.
passive lake.
So yes, yeah, so we got a bit of both of that, and
Okay.
yeah. If we haven't done a recreational study recently on use.
Just incredibly popular over the summer.
Yeah.
It's like Queen Street some days. Queen Street's not popular.
No, it's a bit abandoned.
Like a mall.
any other questions?
Just a question, it may be you, it may be Helen, I don't know who, but the use of overseer, are we just plodding along with overseer? Because it's sort of been brought into question, hasn't it? Yeah.
Okay, for this plan change going forward, at this stage, overseer is not on the table for the rest of the region. You might be able to speak to.
Yeah, for Lake Rotorua and how it's used in Plan Change 10. So if you recall, I presented to you last year about the government panel review, and there was, I think, 3 or 4 recommendations coming out of that. One of those was a rework of overseer, and so that's on track to be delivered in August, and then it will need to be tested in the Rotorua catchment, just to make sure that it works, that, you know, what it spits out makes sense for us, and we still remain confident that it can still be used in Lake Rotorua, that that the rework will provide true results that enable us to make management decisions.
We are, there is a lot of central government work going on in that overseer space, and also risk matrix or risk management, one of those, I'm not quite sure, not heavily involved, but those are 2 areas of work that we kind of have to move on while waiting and hoping that they will be available for our use, but anticipating that they might not be ready in time.
No more questions?
Happy to move the recommendation on 122, Mr. Chairman. We just received the report.
Yeah.
Need a seconder?
I'll second.
Been moved and been seconded by Dave. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Do we have our last report? We've got to go into public disclosure, so that means everybody leaves the room. All yours, Nikki. Thank you very much.
I'll second.